My name is Pia, and I've always been a distrustful person, especially in relationships. I live in the United States, in a mid-sized city like Denver, Colorado, where the winter cold seems to seep not only into your bones, but also into your soul. I was always highly suspicious of my boyfriend, Alex. At first, it wasn't based on concrete reasons. It was more an instinct, a little voice in my head whispering doubts every time he came home late from work or took too long to reply to a text. Alex was an ordinary guy, a 28-year-old software engineer with a charming smile that had won me over in a coffee shop 2 years ago. But with my history of failed relationships, one ex who cheated on me with my best friend, another who turned out to be a pathological liar, I couldn't help questioning everything. "Where were you last night?" I'd ask sometimes, and he'd answer patiently, "At the gym, love," like always. But his patience only fueled my suspicions. I thought he might be hiding something, maybe an affair, or worse, a double life. I tried to control it, sneaking a look at his phone while he slept, but I never found anything. That didn't calm me. Instead, it made me think he was cleverer than I imagined. And then, one sleepless night, browsing dark internet forums, I had the stupidest idea of my life, hiring someone to spy on him. But this spiraled out of control in a way I never imagined, turning my paranoia into a real nightmare that haunts us to this day. It all started about 6 months ago, on one of those cold autumn nights in Denver, where the wind howled against the windows of our downtown apartment. Alex and I had argued that afternoon over something trivial. He wanted to go out with friends to a bar, and I insisted he stay home because we needed time together. Really, it was my insecurity talking. He gave in, as usual, and stayed to watch a movie with me, but I couldn't focus. My mind was racing. What if he was planning to meet someone else? What if those friends were an excuse? After he fell asleep, I quietly got up and sat in the kitchen with my laptop, its screen lighting up my face in the dark. I started by Googling how to know if your partner is cheating, but that led to generic articles I'd read 1,000 times. Then I remembered hearing about the deep web on a true crime podcast I obsessively listened to. I wasn't a regular user. In fact, the idea of that hidden side of the internet, full of illegal and dangerous things, terrified me. But that night, fueled by the wine I'd drunk to calm my nerves, I downloaded Tor and started exploring. At first, it was confusing. Broken links, forums in strange languages, black markets selling drugs or weapons. I felt like an intruder in a world that wasn't mine, my cursor trembling on the screen as I sweated coldly. I searched for private investigation services and found a forum called Shadows Watch, where people offered digital espionage or physical tracking for cryptocurrency. A user named Ghost Eye caught my attention. Their profile read, "Discreet private detective, surveillance, infidelity tracking, detailed reports, payment in Bitcoin, absolute confidentiality." It seemed professional, or at least I wanted to believe it was. I sent an anonymous message. "I need to monitor my boyfriend. I suspect he's cheating. How much does it cost?" They replied almost instantly. "Depends on the level. Basic. Photos, GPS locations, $500 in BTC. Advanced. Phone hacking. Emails, $1,500. My heart was pounding. This was real, probably illegal, but my obsession pushed me forward. I chose the advanced package, thinking it would give me irrefutable proof. I transferred the money from a wallet I created that night and gave details: Alex's name, his work address at a tech company downtown, his phone number, even a photo of him from his LinkedIn profile. "Keep it discreet," I wrote. "I don't want him to find out." Ghost Eye replied, "Done. I'll send daily reports." The first few days were thrilling in a sick way. I received emails to a fake account I'd set up with updates. Subject left work at 6 p.m., went to the gym at 1234 Colfax Avenue. No suspicious interactions. They attached blurry photos of Alex walking down the street or sitting in his car. Nothing incriminating, but that didn't stop me. I interpreted every detail as a clue. Why did it take him 10 minutes longer to get home? Was he talking to someone? I demanded more. Hack his phone. I want to see his messages. Ghost Eye agreed for an extra $300. 2 days later, they sent screenshots of Alex's chats, messages with friends about football, with his boss about projects, even with me, where he told a colleague he loved me and was planning to propose soon. That should have calmed me, but instead, it enraged me. I thought it was too perfect, that maybe he was deleting evidence. "Keep watching," I ordered. "I want to know everything." Then things started to change. A week after hiring them, Alex came home pale, with deep circles under his eyes. "Something weird happened at work today," he said, while we ate pasta I had made to hide my guilt. "I got an anonymous email saying I was being watched, that they knew where I live. Probably spam, but it gave me chills." My stomach churned. Had it been Ghost Eye? I wrote to them that night. "Stop any direct contact. Just watch. Don't threaten him." They replied, "Wasn't me. Maybe he has enemies," but I didn't believe them. The next day, Alex showed me his phone, a text from an unknown number. "I know what you do after work. Stop lying to Pia, or you'll pay." Alex thought it was a prank from a friend, but I knew it wasn't. Panic settled in me like a slow poison. What had I unleashed? The harassment escalated quickly. Ghost Eye started sending more detailed reports, but with a strange tone. Subject visited a bar alone. Is he seeing someone? Photo attached. In the photo, Alex looked terrified, glancing over his shoulder. Then direct threats to Alex arrived. Middle of the night calls from blocked numbers where a distorted voice whispered, "I'm watching you. If you don't confess your secrets, I'll kill you." Alex told me everything, trembling in bed that night, and I feigned surprise, hugging him while my mind screamed with regret. I tried to cut contact with Ghost Eye. "Stop everything. Refund my money," but they replied, "Too late. I'm part of this now. Your boyfriend's a liar, and I'll expose him." They attached a photo of Alex in our apartment, taken from the street, with a red cross over his face. How had they gotten that? Had they investigated me too? The terror became constant. Alex started receiving packages at work, one with a note saying, "I know where you sleep," and a photo of us sleeping, taken God knows how. Another with a knife wrapped in paper, stained with what looked like fake blood. We called the police, but they said, without concrete evidence, tracking was difficult. They suggested changing numbers and increasing security. Meanwhile, I tried confronting Ghost Eye on the forum, but their profile vanished. Instead, I got an email. "You paid for truth, Pia. Now you'll get it. Your boyfriend will die if you don't tell him you hired me." My world was collapsing. How did they know my real name? I'd been careful, using a VPN and fake accounts, but clearly not careful enough. Alex became paranoid. He installed cameras in the apartment, checked the locks 3 times before bed, and our relationship grew strained. "Someone wants me dead," he'd say, and I'd nod, feeling guilt like a weight in my chest. One night, the harassment peaked. We were at home, watching TV to distract ourselves, when Alex's phone rang. He answered, and his face went pale. "Hello, Alex. I know Pia's hiding something. Ask her about Ghost Eye." They hung up, and Alex looked at me with eyes full of confusion and fear. "What the hell is this? Do you know this person?" I lied, saying no, but he didn't fully believe me. That night, someone pounded on the door at 3 a.m. We ran to the balcony and saw a hooded figure below, looking up, recording us with a phone. We called the police again, but by the time they arrived, the figure was gone. They found a note on the door. "Next time, I come in and finish the job." We couldn't go on like this. We decided to move. We packed everything in a week, sold the apartment at a loss, and moved to Seattle, Washington, thousands of miles away. We changed phone numbers, emails, computers, everything new, nothing linked to the old. Alex thinks it was a random stalker, maybe a jealous ex-coworker. He doesn't know what I did, and I'm not going to tell him. It would destroy what's left of us. But even here, in this rainy city, we don't feel entirely safe. I get spam emails that feel too personal, and Alex swore he saw someone following him last week. Is it Ghost Eye or my imagination? This nightmare I created haunts us, a grim reminder of how my distrust destroyed our peace. I remember every detail of that first transaction with Ghost Eye like it was yesterday. The click of the mouse sending the Bitcoin, the pulse pounding in my temples as I waited for the blockchain confirmation, thinking it was empowering, that I was finally taking control of my doubts. But now, looking back, I see how that action opened a door to real human darkness, not the paranormal kind from horror stories, but the kind from real people with hidden agendas, capable of invading your life like a silent virus. Alex and I are trying to rebuild in Seattle, renting an apartment in Capitol Hill with views of the bay, but fear seeps into everything. I check the locks obsessively, avoid the deep web, and when Alex goes out, I stay glued to my phone, waiting for his "I'm here" call. He's changed too. He's no longer the relaxed guy, now sleeping with a bat under the bed, and our nights are quiet, heavy with unspoken words. Sometimes, in the stillness, I wonder if Ghost Eye was a real detective or just a scammer who saw an opportunity to torment, feeding off my paranoia like a parasite. And the worst terror is knowing I invited them into our lives, that my distrust not only doubted Alex, but put him in real danger, threatened with death by a stranger who might now be in any shadow. There's no complete escape. Fear is a permanent companion, a grim whisper reminding me I'll never be safe. My curiosity about the deep web always intrigued me, not for the reasons you might be thinking. I wasn't a criminal, nor was I looking for drugs or anything like that. It was purely intellectual curiosity, like watching documentaries about forbidden places or expeditions to remote locations. The idea that there was an entire parallel internet, invisible to regular search engines, fascinated me since I was 17 years old. My name is Marcus, and this story happened when I was 23, fresh out of college with a degree in computer science. I lived in Portland, Oregon, in a one-bedroom apartment I shared with my cat, Pixel. I worked as a junior developer at a small startup. Nothing glamorous, but it paid the bills and left me time for my, let's call them, research hobbies. It all began on a Friday night in October of 2019. I'd been reading about cybersecurity and anonymous networks for a personal project, and after a few beers, I decided to finally do what I'd been putting off for years: set up Tor and take a real look at the deep web. It wasn't my first time using Tor, but it was the first time I planned to explore beyond the obvious sites everyone knows about. I'd been preparing for weeks, reading about security, VPNs, virtual machines. I wasn't going to be one of those idiots who end up with malware because they clicked the wrong link. The setup took me almost 2 hours. A virtual machine with Linux, a paid VPN, Tor browser with all security settings maxed out. I even disconnected my webcam as a precaution. It might sound paranoid, but I'd read enough stories to avoid unnecessary risks. The first sites I visited were pretty mundane: discussion forums, some censored news sites, digital libraries. It was fascinating, but not particularly thrilling, like walking through a massive, dimly lit library where half the books are in languages you don't understand. Around midnight, I stumbled across something that caught my attention: a forum called Underground Research that seemed to be for people interested in, well, underground research, cybersecurity, anonymity techniques, digital forensics, that sort of thing. It seemed legitimate, even professional. To participate, you had to register, which I did using a disposable email address and a randomly chosen username, Cypher7. There was nothing personal about it. I just wanted something that sounded technical. The discussion threads were genuinely interesting. People were sharing malware analysis techniques, debating zero-day vulnerabilities, talking about encryption methods. It was like an advanced cybersecurity course with no academic restrictions. I spent the next 3 weeks visiting the forum regularly. Mostly, I just read. Occasionally, I'd ask a technical question or share an interesting article I'd found. It was a small community, maybe 50 active users, and after a while, I started recognizing the regular usernames. One of them was Deep Diver. This user always had the most detailed answers, new techniques I'd never seen documented anywhere. At first, I thought they were some kind of security researcher or maybe a highly experienced consultant. It was Deep Diver who sent me the first private message. "I see you have a genuine interest in this," the message read. "Most new users come here looking for cheap thrills or trying to be movie hackers. You ask smart questions. Would you be interested in seeing some more advanced resources?" I felt flattered, honestly. It was like the smartest professor in class had approached me after a lecture to keep the conversation going. I replied that yes, I was interested in learning more. What followed were several weeks of increasingly technical exchanges. Deep Diver shared analysis tools I didn't know existed, detection evasion techniques, methods for safely analyzing malware. It was like having a personal cybersecurity mentor. But after a month, something began to shift in the messages. "I've been observing your activity," they wrote in one message. "Not just here on the forum. You're more careful than most, but not as careful as you think." That made me nervous. What did they mean by observing my activity? I asked what they meant, but their response was evasive. Just saying you should be more careful with your OPSEC. There are ways to track people, even when they think they're anonymous. I decided to take a break from the forum for a few days, but when I returned, more messages from Deep Diver were waiting. "Why'd you leave?" one said. "Did I scare you?" "That wasn't my intention." "I've been waiting for you to come back," read another, sent just a few hours before I logged in. That was the first real red flag. How did they know exactly when I'd logged in? The forum didn't show online status for regular users. I decided to ignore the messages and focus on public discussion threads. But the private messages kept coming. "I know you're reading this, Marcus." My heart stopped. I'd used a completely different username, a disposable email, a VPN, Tor. How the hell did they know my real name? "No need to worry," the message continued. "I'm not going to do anything with that information. Just wanted you to know I know you better than you think." I couldn't sleep that night. I checked all my security settings, changed passwords, even wiped the virtual machine and started from scratch. But when I returned to the forum a few days later, more messages were waiting. "Changing your setup won't help," the latest message read. "I already know who you are, where you live, where you work. Marcus Chen, Apartment 4B on Hawthorne Boulevard, developer at DevStorm Solutions." Not only did they have my name and address, they knew where I worked, and the most terrifying part, all that information was correct. I slammed my laptop shut and disconnected it from the internet. For 3 days, I didn't touch anything computer-related beyond what was absolutely necessary for work. But curiosity and fear are powerful forces, and eventually, I needed to know more. When I returned to the forum, there were a dozen new messages from Deep Diver. "You think ignoring me will make me go away? Marcus, I'm starting to lose patience. You know, Portland's a beautiful city, especially your neighborhood, very quiet at night." The last message included a photo. My apartment building, taken from the street. There was no way it was a random Google Street View image. I could see my bike chained up in the common area, the same bike I'd put there the week before. I called the police. The officer who took my report was, let's say, less than helpful. An older guy, probably a few years from retirement, who clearly didn't understand the internet beyond email. "So, someone on the dark internet knows where you live?" he repeated, as if talking about UFOs. "And they're sending you threatening messages?" Not exactly threatening, I had to admit. More unsettling. But they know personal information they shouldn't. Has this person directly threatened you? Said they're going to hurt you? Not directly, but... "Look, kid," he interrupted. "Get better antivirus software and stay away from those weird sites. We can't do much about someone knowing your address unless they do something actually threatening." I left the police station more frustrated than when I'd arrived, but I decided to take his advice about staying away. I uninstalled Tor, changed all my passwords again, and tried to pretend nothing had happened. For 2 weeks, it worked. Life went back to normal. Work, home, the usual routines. I started convincing myself it had been some elaborate prank or that Deep Diver had lost interest. Then the letters started. The first appeared on a Tuesday morning, slipped under my door. No postage, no return address, just my name handwritten on the envelope. Inside was a single sheet of paper with a printed message. "Did you think disappearing from the internet would make me forget you? Technology is just a tool, Marcus. The real world is far more interesting." The second letter came 2 days later. Same method. This time, it contained a photo. Me leaving my apartment building that same morning, clearly taken from close by. What terrified me most was that I remembered that specific moment. I'd been checking my phone as I walked out, and in the photo, you could see exactly what I was looking at on the screen. The third letter arrived on Friday. It contained only an address, 847 S.E. Morrison Street, and a time, Saturday, 3 p.m. Come alone. By then, I was completely terrified, but also desperate for answers. Who was this person? What did they want from me? Why me? I googled the address. It was a small cafe in southeast Portland, the kind of place frequented by college students and freelancers with laptops. A public place, theoretically safe. I decided to go, but not alone. I asked my friend Jake, a big guy who'd played college football, to come with me. I didn't tell him exactly what was going on, just that I needed moral support for a meeting that made me nervous. Jake was the kind of guy who'd ask questions later, not before. We arrived at the cafe 15 minutes early. I chose a table near the window with a clear view of the entrance, and Jake sat at a separate table nearby, pretending to read a book. We'd agreed on simple signals. If I touched my nose, he was to come over immediately. At 3 p.m, a man who looked about 40 approached my table. He was more ordinary than I'd imagined. Average height, slim build, messy brown hair, jeans, and a hoodie. He could have been any tech worker in Portland. "Marcus," he said, not asking. "I'm David. Though you know me as Deep Diver." He sat down without invitation, ordered a coffee from a passing waitress, and smiled at me like we were old friends catching up. "I know you have questions," he began, "and I know you're scared. That's okay. Fear can be healthy when it's appropriate. What do you want from me?" I managed to ask. My voice sounded shakier than I'd have liked. "I want you to understand something important," he said, stirring his coffee slowly. "I want you to understand how easy it was to find you. How easy it is to find anyone I don't understand. Marcus, you work in cybersecurity, or at least that's your area of interest, but you don't really understand how vulnerable you are. Nobody does until someone shows them." David pulled a tablet from his backpack and placed it on the table, screen facing me. It was a full digital dossier of my life. Photos from my college days, my work history, even pictures of my parents in Ohio I'd posted on Facebook years ago. "This took me less than 2 hours to compile," he said. "Your forum username wasn't as anonymous as you thought. Small mistakes in your OPSEC, a distinctive writing pattern I could correlate with posts on other sites under your real name. Once I had that, the rest was trivial. I kept staring at the screen, seeing years of my digital life organized like evidence in a criminal case. But that's just the technical side," David continued. "The real work was the physical reconnaissance. Following you for a few weeks, learning your routines, your schedules. You're very predictable, Marcus. Most people are." "Why?" I asked. "Why are you doing this?" "Because someone needs to," he replied, as if it were the most obvious thing in the world. "Because people like you need to understand that digital privacy is an illusion, that real security requires real paranoia." David leaned forward, lowering his voice. "But also because I can. Because it's fascinating to see how easy it is to dismantle someone's sense of security. It's like a social experiment." That was the moment I realized I was dealing with someone deeply disturbed. This wasn't a security researcher proving an academic point. This was someone who enjoyed the control, the fear, the violation of privacy as an end in itself. I touched my nose. Jake came over immediately, sitting next to me with an expression that clearly said something bad was about to happen to David if he didn't like what he saw. "Everything okay here?" Jake asked, staring straight at David. David smiled, a gesture that didn't reach his eyes. "Everything's perfectly fine," he said. "Marcus and I were just finishing our conversation." He stood, left $5 on the table for his coffee, and headed for the door. But before leaving, he turned back. "Marcus," he said, loud enough for me to hear across the cafe. "This doesn't end here. You've been very interesting." Jake wanted to call the police immediately, but what were we going to tell them? A man had sat with me in a public cafe, had a weird conversation, and left. Technically, he hadn't done anything illegal, but I knew this was far from over. For the next 2 weeks, life became a different kind of hell. No more letters, no more online messages. Instead, David had taken a much subtler and therefore more terrifying approach. Little things started being out of place in my apartment. Nothing obviously moved, nothing missing, but different. A book I remembered leaving on the coffee table appeared on the shelf. My programmable coffee maker's settings changed from the schedule I'd set. Pixel, my cat, acted nervous, especially near the window overlooking the back alley. The most unsettling were the photos. They started arriving in my email, sent from disposable addresses that changed every time. Photos of me at work, at the grocery store, at the laundromat, always taken from a distance, always close enough to show David knew exactly where I was at any given moment. One photo showed me at my desk at work, taken from the parking lot. Another showed me buying Chinese food, taken from the car next to mine. The most disturbing showed me in my apartment, standing in the kitchen, clearly taken from the building across the street. I installed extra locks, changed the existing ones, even bought a security camera for the front door. But David was too smart to be caught by such obvious measures. The photos kept coming, along with occasional emails that just said things like, "New lock," "Interesting choice," or "The camera's a nice touch, but it's not pointed in the right direction." Work became impossible. I couldn't focus, jumping every time someone approached my desk. My colleagues started noticing something was wrong. But how do you explain you're being stalked by someone you met on the deep web? It sounded like paranoia or the plot of a bad movie. My boss, Sarah, finally pulled me aside after a particularly bad week. "Marcus, something's obviously going on," she said. "Your work's been slipping, and you're acting like you're expecting someone to jump out from behind every corner. Is there anything we need to talk about?" I told her an edited version of the truth, that someone had been harassing me, that I'd involved the police, that I was waiting for it to resolve. Sarah was sympathetic, but also practical. "Take some time off," she suggested. "Paid personal leave. Sort this out, and when you're ready to come back at 100%, your job will be here." So I took 2 weeks off, hoping a change in routine might break David's surveillance pattern. Instead, it only made things worse. With more free time, David escalated his activities. Photos arrived multiple times a day. He started sending audio recordings, the sound of my footsteps in my apartment, recorded from the hallway. The sound of my voice on a phone call, clearly captured through a directional microphone. Even a recording of me talking to Pixel, taken from somewhere near my window. But what finally broke me was the video. It arrived on a Tuesday morning, sent from another disposable email address. It was a 4-minute video of me sleeping in my bed, filmed from inside my bedroom. The timestamp showed it had been recorded the previous night. David had been inside my apartment while I slept. This time, when I went to the police, I brought all the evidence: the letters, the photos, the emails, the video. The detective assigned to me, Detective Morrison, was younger than the previous officer and clearly more familiar with tech-related crimes. "This is definitely harassment," he said after reviewing everything. "And breaking and entering. We have enough for an arrest warrant if we can identify the perpetrator." But that was the problem. David was clearly an alias, and all his communications came from disposable accounts routed through anonymous services. The only time I'd seen him in person was at the cafe, where he'd paid in cash and likely arrived on foot. "We're going to need you to help us catch him," Morrison said. "Is there any way to contact him, to set up another meeting?" "No," I had to admit. "All communication has been one way. He contacts me, not the other way around." Morrison frowned. "Then we'll have to wait for him to make contact again, and when he does, be ready." But David didn't make contact again, at least not in the way expected. Instead, he escalated. The next events unfolded over a 5-day period that I remember as the most terrifying week of my life. Monday. I came home from work to find someone had been in my apartment again. This time, it wasn't subtle. Drawers were open, papers scattered, my electronics clearly tampered with. On my bathroom mirror, written in red marker, was a message: "Your security is an illusion." Tuesday. My car wouldn't start in the morning. When a mechanic came to check it, he found several critical wires had been cleanly cut. Not random vandalism, but specific, knowledgeable sabotage. While I waited for the tow truck, I got an email. Mechanical issues can be so inconvenient, especially when you live so far from work Wednesday. My internet went out. When the cable company technician arrived, he found someone had accessed the building's utility closet and specifically disconnected my line. While the technician worked, my phone rang. Unknown number. "Hello, Marcus." It was David's voice, the first time he'd used the phone. "What do you want?" I managed to say. "I want you to understand that I can disrupt any aspect of your life whenever I want. Your transportation, your communication, your home. And this is just the beginning. The police know about you," I said. "They're going to catch you." David laughed, a sound that chilled my blood. "Marcus, the police can't protect you from someone who truly understands how systems work. They think in terms of physical evidence and legal procedures. I think in terms of attack vectors and vulnerability surfaces." "What do you want?" I repeated. "I want you to learn. I want you to understand how completely helpless you are. And when you finally understand that, I want you to know it was your own curiosity that put you in this situation." He hung up. Thursday. I woke to the sound of my smoke detector. I ran through the apartment looking for smoke or fire, but there was nothing. When I finally found the detector that was going off, there was a note taped to it. False alarms can be so disruptive, especially at 3 a.m. That day, I stayed home from work. I called Detective Morrison and told him about the phone call and the escalating incidents. "We need to get you out of there," he said. "Do you have anywhere you can stay? Family, friends?" "My sister lives in Seattle," I said. "I could stay with her for a while." "Do it. Tonight. And don't tell anyone exactly where you're going." I packed a suitcase quickly, put Pixel in his carrier, and drove straight to Seattle. I didn't tell anyone at work, didn't post anything on social media, even paid for gas and cash to avoid any credit card trail. For 3 days, I felt safe at my sister's apartment in Capitol Hill. She asked questions, of course, but didn't push when I told her it was a temporary situation related to security issues. Then, on Friday morning, my sister received a package. No return address, but it was addressed to her by name. Rebecca Chen. Inside was a note and a series of photos. The note read, Your brother thinks he can hide. These photos were taken yesterday. The photos showed me in my sister's apartment. One taken through the living room window, another of me in the kitchen, a third of me walking to my car on the street. David had found me in less than 3 days. Rebecca was terrified, understandably. Marcus, what the hell is going on? Who is this person? I told her everything. The deep web, the forum, David, the months of harassment. When I finished, she was pale. You need to leave, she said. I can't have this in my life. I have a daughter, Marcus. What if this lunatic decides we're targets too? I understood her position, but it hurt. My own sister was too scared to help me. That night, as I sat in my car in the parking lot of a cheap hotel near the Seattle airport, my phone rang again. Enjoying your little vacation? David asked. How did you find me? Marcus, do you really want me to explain every method? The magnetic GPS tracker on your car I installed 3 weeks ago, the keylogger on your laptop that's been recording all your searches and communications, the analysis of your behavioral patterns that lets me predict your decisions before you make them. I felt physically sick. How long had David been monitoring every aspect of my life without me knowing? But there are simpler methods too, he continued, like the fact that you only have 3 close relatives on the West Coast, and your sister is the only one you're close enough with to show up at unannounced. What do you want from me? I asked for the 3rd time in that call, but this time it sounded more like a plea. I want you to make a choice, Marcus. You can keep trying to hide, and I can keep finding you until eventually you involve enough innocent people that someone gets hurt. Or you can accept that you've lost, and we can come to an arrangement. What kind of arrangement? You move. Far away. East Coast, maybe. Change your name, your career, your entire life. And in return, I forget you exist. And if I don't, then this becomes a lot less fun for you. And a lot more fun for me. I didn't sleep that night. I sat in the hotel car, watching every shadow, every movement in the parking lot. Every car that passed could have been David. Every person walking through the area could have been David. By morning, I'd made my decision. I called Detective Morrison and explained the situation. You can't let a criminal scare you out of your life, he said. We have resources. We can protect you. For how long? I asked. For the rest of my life? And what about my family? Are you going to protect my sister, my parents, anyone I've ever come into contact with? Morrison went silent. We both knew the answer was no. Besides, I continued, this guy clearly knows things you don't. He's been several steps ahead of us at every stage. I'm not sure you can protect me, even if you wanted to. That afternoon, I started making calls. First to my boss, resigning effective immediately for a personal emergency. Then to my landlord, breaking my apartment lease and losing the deposit. I called a moving company to pack and store my things. Detective Morrison arranged for someone to oversee the move from my apartment and check all my belongings for hidden tracking devices. They found 3. 1 in my laptop, 1 sewn into the lining of my work backpack, and 1 magnetic device attached to the inside of my car's gas tank. My final act before leaving Portland was to go to the animal shelter where I'd adopted Pixel years ago. It was the hardest decision, but I couldn't take him with me into a life of constant moving and paranoia. At least at the shelter, he'd be safe. I moved to Boston under a new name. Marcus Chen became Michael Carter through a legal process that took months and cost more money than I had. I switched careers entirely, from software development to teaching, something different enough to require new credentials and a full background check. For the first 6 months in Boston, every unexpected sound made me jump. Every email from an unknown address triggered panic attacks. I constantly checked over my shoulder, looked for familiar faces in crowds, varied my routes and schedules obsessively. But gradually, as months passed without contact from David, I started to relax. I got a job teaching at a local high school, found a small apartment in Jamaica Plain, and even started dating a co-worker named Sarah. After a year, I'd almost started to feel like a normal person again. I'd almost started to believe David had kept his word, that he'd moved on to more interesting targets. Then the package arrived. It was a Saturday morning in November, exactly 2 years after the original harassment began. The package was addressed to Michael Carter at my new address, which immediately told me my new identity had been compromised. Inside was a single photo, me leaving my new apartment that same morning, taken from the street. On the back of the photo, written in the same handwriting as the original letters, was a message. "Did you think this was over? This never ends, Marcus. I just take breaks occasionally." Below, that was another line. "Boston's a beautiful city. You're going to love living here. Temporarily." That night, I packed another suitcase. This time, I headed to Austin, Texas. 6 months later, when the photos started arriving again, I moved to Denver. After Denver was Phoenix, then Richmond, then Milwaukee. I've been running for 5 years now. I've had 8 different names, 13 different jobs, lived in 17 different apartments. I've learned to spot surveillance, to vary my patterns, to live like a ghost. But David always finds me eventually. The methods vary. Sometimes photos sent by mail, sometimes emails from disposable accounts, once a message written on the steamed up mirror in my apartment bathroom. But the message is always the same. I see you. I know where you are, and I can reach you whenever I want. The scariest part isn't even the ongoing harassment. It's knowing there's someone out there with the skills and obsession to keep this up indefinitely. It's understanding that your privacy, your sense of security, your ability to form lasting relationships can all be taken away by one person with enough technical knowledge and enough patience. I have no idea what drives David, whether it's some twisted psychological experiment, a personal obsession with me specifically, or if I'm just one of many targets in some larger game I don't understand. I've never managed to find out who he really is, where he lives, or how he sustains the resources for this level of surveillance. What I do know is that he taught me a lesson I'll never forget. The technology we think protects us can be used against us by someone who understands it better than we do. Digital privacy is an illusion for most of us, and curiosity, without the proper paranoia to go with it, can lead to life-altering consequences. I now live in a city I won't name, under a name I won't reveal. I've learned to accept that I'll probably never have a normal life again. I can't maintain long-term relationships because eventually I have to disappear without explanation. I can't advance in a career because every few months I have to start over somewhere new. But I've survived, and part of me hopes that by telling this story, I might warn someone else. The deep web isn't a game. The people you meet there aren't characters in a cyber thriller movie. They're real, and some of them are deeply disturbed, with skills most of us can't even imagine. If you're reading this and thinking about exploring those dark corners of the internet, Out of curiosity, my advice is simple. Don't. It's not worth the risk. And if you've already done it and had interactions that make you uneasy, get out immediately. Delete everything, change everything, and consider moving preemptively. Because once someone like David sets their sights on you, your life as you know it is over. And 5 years later, I still haven't found a way to take it back. This morning, when I checked my email, there was a message from an address I didn't recognize. It read only, "New city, new name, same interesting person. See you soon, Marcus." So I'm leaving again. Tomorrow morning, I pack the few possessions I have, abandon the apartment I've been renting month to month, and disappear into another city under another identity. And in 6 months, or a year, or maybe this time 2 years, David will show up again. Because that's what he does. That's what he is. And I'll keep running, because it's the only thing I know how to do now. That's my story. That's my life now. A perpetual warning about the fragility of privacy and the terrible price of misguided curiosity. The deep web always intrigued me. Now, I wish I'd never heard of it. What I do know is that I stumbled onto something much bigger and more sinister than I'd imagined. A network of surveillance and control operating completely outside the legal system, run by people with unlimited resources and no moral scruples. And I know that my old life, Laura Hartwell, Chicago librarian, ended forever the night I decided to explore the dark corners of the internet out of curiosity. If you're reading this and considering your own exploration of the deep web, my advice is simple. Don't. Curiosity can be a powerful drive, but some doors, once opened, can't be closed again. And sometimes, what's on the other side of those doors is watching back. My name used to be Laura Hartwell. Now, I don't really know who I am, but I know I'll never go home again. My name is Laura, and what I'm about to tell you changed my life forever. Until 6 months ago, I was a completely normal person, a 28-year-old librarian in Chicago, living alone in a small but cozy apartment in Lincoln Park, with a predictable routine and a quiet life. My biggest worry was whether they'd renew my annual contract at the library. It all started because of my job, ironically. The library had received a grant to create a digital literacy program for seniors, and part of my responsibility was researching internet safety and digital privacy to include in the curriculum. As part of that research, I began reading about anonymous networks, encryption, and yes, the deep web. It wasn't the first time I'd heard of it, obviously. I'd seen documentaries and read news articles about drug markets and other illegal things supposedly happening in those internet depths, but I'd never really considered exploring it until understanding these topics became part of my job. The decision to actually access the deep web was gradual. First, I installed Tor just to understand how it worked. Then I visited some obviously legitimate sites, like versions of news outlets censored in other countries, all very academic, very professional. But there was something hypnotic about the idea of this invisible, parallel internet. As a librarian, I'd always been fascinated by access to information, and here was an entire library of content most people would never see. Professional curiosity blended with personal curiosity, and before I knew it, I was spending hours navigating links to increasingly darker places. It was during one of those late-night exploration sessions, around 2 a.m. on a Friday, when I found something I shouldn't have seen. I'd been following links from a cybersecurity forum to increasingly specialized sites. Many of the links were dead or led to error pages, but some worked. It was on one of these sites that I saw a category simply labeled Private Investigation Files. I should have stopped there. Something about the name made me uneasy, but my curiosity got the better of me. I clicked. The site that opened looked professional, almost like an academic database. There were sections organized by date, geographic region, and type of investigation. There was no explanation of what kind of organization maintained it or what its purpose was, just lists of files with coded names. I picked one at random, CHI 2023-047 VID. I thought maybe CHI referred to Chicago, which piqued my local curiosity. The file took several minutes to download. When it finally opened, it took me a moment to process what I was seeing. It was a surveillance video, clearly recorded without the knowledge of the person being filmed. It showed a young woman, maybe my age, in what appeared to be her apartment. She was doing completely normal things, cooking, watching TV, talking on the phone. But the video's quality and multiple angles suggested a sophisticated surveillance system installed without her knowledge. What really disturbed me was the information accompanying the video. There was a text file with incredibly specific details about this woman's life. Her full name, address, workplace, daily routines, even information about her family and friends. It was like a complete dossier compiled by someone who'd been watching her for months. I closed the file immediately, feeling dirty just for having seen it. But morbid curiosity is a powerful force. Despite my unease, I opened another file. This one was worse. It showed an older man being followed through what looked like downtown Chicago streets. The video had been compiled from multiple public and private security cameras, creating a continuous record of his movements over an entire day. The metadata showed it had been compiled just 2 weeks earlier. I opened a third file, then a fourth. Each one documented elaborate surveillance of seemingly innocent people in the Chicago area. Men, women, young, old. There was no obvious pattern except that they all seemed to be targets of some kind of massive surveillance operation. But it was the fifth file that truly terrified me. The file was named LP 2023-051-VID, and when it opened, I immediately recognized the location. It was my apartment building. Specifically, it was the lobby of my building, filmed from a camera that definitely wasn't there the last time I'd paid attention. The video showed various residents coming and going over what appeared to be a full week. I appeared multiple times, always at the same morning time when I left for work, and the same evening time when I returned. But what made me nauseous was the information in the accompanying text file. It didn't just have my full name, address, and workplace. It had my social security number, my credit history, the names of my parents in Minnesota, and even details about my personal life I thought only I knew. Laura Michelle Hartwell, 28 years old, librarian at Chicago Public Library, Lincoln Park Branch, lives alone. No active romantic relationships. Predictable routine. Threat level, low. Surveillance status, active since the 15th of August, 2023. The date was from 3 months ago. Someone had been watching me for 3 months without my knowledge. My hands were shaking as I closed the file. I shut down the Tor browser, turned off my laptop, and sat in the darkness of my apartment, trying to process what I'd seen. I had stumbled onto some kind of massive surveillance operation. innocent people were being followed, recorded, investigated, for reasons I couldn't understand. And I was one of them. I didn't sleep that night. Every sound in the building made me jump. Every car passing on the street could have been someone watching me. I started noticing things I'd never noticed before. A white van that seemed to be parked on my street more often than I remembered. Windows in the building across the street that always seemed to have the curtains open just enough to allow a clear view of my apartment. But by morning, in the daylight, I started convincing myself I'd misinterpreted what I'd seen. Maybe it was some kind of fictional database, or maybe the files were old and outdated. Maybe there was an innocent explanation. Those hopes lasted exactly until Monday morning. When I got to work, there was a bouquet of flowers on my desk. Yellow flowers, my favorites, though I'd never told anyone at work. The card simply said, "For Laura." From an admirer, I asked my supervisor, Janet, if she knew anything about the flowers. "Oh, a courier dropped them off early this morning," she said. "Said they were for you specifically." Got a secret admirer. "What did the courier look like?" I asked, trying to keep my voice casual. Janet shrugged. "Didn't get a good look. Older guy, I think, wearing a cap. Why?" That afternoon, after work, I took a different route home. Instead of my usual path down Lincoln Avenue, I took a long detour through several residential streets. It was during this detour that I confirmed my worst suspicions. The white van I'd noticed on my street appeared behind me 3 streets after I'd made my first turn. I made several more turns, seemingly random, and the van followed me on every one. When I finally reached my building, the van drove past, but I could clearly see 2 people inside. That night, I didn't leave my apartment. I ordered delivery and stayed inside, keeping the curtains closed. But even in my own home, I didn't feel safe. If they'd really installed cameras in my building without my knowledge, what made me think my apartment itself was secure? I started examining every room meticulously. I checked behind pictures, inside lamps, under furniture. In the bedroom, behind my dresser, I found something that made me vomit immediately. It was a small device the size of a coin, clearly technological, with a tiny lens. It was discreetly taped to the wall, positioned for a clear view of my bed. Someone had been recording video of me sleeping. With trembling hands, I searched the rest of the apartment. I found 2 more devices, one in the living room, hidden inside a plant I definitely didn't remember buying, and another in the kitchen, camouflaged inside what looked like an extra smoke detector. My apartment had been turned into a recording studio without my knowledge. I called the police immediately. The 2 officers who responded were professional, but clearly skeptical. They examined the devices I'd found, took photos, asked basic questions about whether I had any troublesome ex-boyfriends or disputes with neighbors. "These devices are pretty sophisticated," admitted one of the officers, Officer Rodriguez. "Not the kind of thing you'd buy at a regular electronics store. Do you work somewhere where you might have had access to sensitive information, something someone might want?" I told them about my job at the library, which obviously didn't sound like something that would justify professional surveillance. I didn't mention anything about the deep web or what I'd found there. I wasn't sure if that would help or get me into more trouble. "We'll send these devices for analysis," Rodriguez said, "and we'll increase patrols in your area. But honestly, Ms. Hartwell, this level of surveillance suggests there's something bigger at play here. Are you sure there's nothing else you can tell us?" After the police left, I sat in my living room, staring at the empty spaces where the cameras had been. I knew I had to tell them about what I'd found on the deep web, but I also knew that might implicate me in something I didn't fully understand the ramifications of. That night, I decided to stay in a hotel. I packed a small suitcase, left extra food for my cat, Whiskers, and drove to a Holiday Inn near the airport. I paid in cash and checked in under my mother's maiden name. For the first time in days, I could sleep. But my peace didn't last long. When I woke up in the morning and checked my phone, I'd received a text message from an unknown number during the night. "Laura, we know where you are. We know what you found. You better forget what you saw and go back to your normal life." My blood ran cold. How had they gotten my number? And how did they know where I was if I'd paid in cash and used a fake name? A second message came through as I was reading the first. Holiday Inn, room 237. Nice view of the parking lot. I ran to the window. My room was exactly 237, and it did indeed overlook the parking lot. In the parking lot, I could see the same white van that had been following me. I packed immediately and left the hotel through a back exit I'd noticed the night before. Instead of going to my car, I called an Uber from my work phone, a separate line the library had given me, and asked the driver to take me downtown. During the ride, my personal phone kept ringing with calls from unknown numbers. I didn't answer any, but the voicemails they left were increasingly disturbing. "Laura, this doesn't have to be difficult. We just want to talk. You're making things worse for yourself by running. We have some very interesting photos of you, Laura. Would you like to see them?" The last message nearly made me vomit again. What kind of photos did they have? How long had they been watching me? What else had they recorded without my knowledge? I asked the Uber driver to drop me off at the library. It was Tuesday morning. The place would be full of people, and I thought I'd be safe, surrounded by colleagues and patrons. But when I got to work, Janet was waiting with a worried expression. "Laura, there's a man here who says he needs to talk to you," she said. "Says it's about a police matter. He's waiting in the conference room." My first instinct was to run immediately. But if it really was a police officer, running would only make things worse. I asked Janet to come with me as a witness. The man in the conference room wasn't a cop. He was middle-aged, well-dressed in a suit that probably cost more than my monthly salary. He had the kind of presence that suggested authority, the kind of person used to being obeyed without question. "Ms. Harwell," he said, standing as we entered. "I'm Mr. Davidson. We need to talk about what you found on the internet last night." Janet looked at me, confused. "Laura, what's he talking about?" "Janet, could you give us a moment alone?" Davidson asked. "Actually, I prefer she stay," I said quickly. I didn't want to be alone with this man. Davidson sighed. "Very well. Miss Hartwell, you accidentally accessed information that wasn't meant for public eyes. Information related to an ongoing national security investigation." "National security," I repeated, but it was just videos of ordinary people. People who are persons of interest in a terrorism investigation, Davidson interrupted. "What you saw were files from a surveillance operation authorized by federal court order. That didn't make sense. The people in the videos looked completely normal, doing completely innocent things. If it's a legal, authorized investigation," I said, "why were the files on the deep web? And why did you install illegal cameras in my apartment?" Davidson smiled, but it wasn't a kind smile. "The cameras in your apartment were installed after you accessed the classified files." to monitor whether you'd shared the information with anyone else. That's completely illegal, Janet said, who had been listening with a growing expression of shock. Actually, it's not, Davidson replied. Not under the Patriot Act when it comes to national security. He pulled a folder from his briefcase and placed it on the table. Ms. Hartwell, this is a non-disclosure agreement. If you sign this, promising never to speak about what you saw, we can forget this ever happened. Your problems will go away, and you can return to your normal life. And if I don't sign, then we'll have to treat this as a national security violation, which carries very serious consequences. I told him I needed time to think about it and consult a lawyer. Davidson didn't look happy, but he agreed to give me 24 hours. After he left, Janet and I sat in silence for several minutes. Laura, what the hell is really going on? She finally asked. I told her everything. The deep web, the files I'd found, the cameras in my apartment, the stalking. Janet listened in silence, her expression growing more alarmed with each detail. This doesn't sound like a legitimate government operation, she said when I finished. It sounds like something much more sinister. That afternoon, using a library computer, I started researching Mr. Davidson. I couldn't find any record of anyone by that name working for any government agency. In fact, I couldn't find any record of him at all. I also tried contacting Officer Rodriguez to ask about the surveillance devices they'd confiscated. When I finally reached him, he said something that made me feel like the world was crumbling beneath my feet. What devices? He asked. Ms. Hartwell, we never came to your apartment. We have no record of a call from you. But that was impossible. I clearly remembered the two officers coming to my apartment, examining the cameras, taking photos. Rodriguez specifically had said they'd send the devices for analysis. Officer, you were at my apartment Sunday night, I insisted. You and another officer. You found 3 surveillance devices. Mom, I assure you, we've had no contact with you, and I checked our records twice. There's no report of any complaint from you. When I hung up the phone, my hands were shaking. The officers who had come to my apartment weren't real. They'd been part of some elaborate setup. But why? Why would someone pretend to be police just to remove the surveillance cameras from my apartment? Unless they hadn't removed the cameras at all. Unless the entire encounter was designed to make me believe the cameras had been found and removed while they were still there. That night, I didn't go home. Instead, I drove to my college friend Sarah's house in the suburbs. Sarah and I had lost touch in recent years, but when I explained I had an emergency, she immediately invited me to stay with her. Over dinner, I told her an edited version of what was going on. I left out the details about the deep web, but said someone had been harassing me and I'd found surveillance devices in my apartment. Laura, this sounds really serious, Sarah said. Have you thought about moving temporarily? Maybe going to see your parents in Minnesota until this blows over. It was a good idea, but I had a job I couldn't abandon indefinitely. And part of me rebelled against the idea of being driven out of my own life by, well, I still wasn't sure exactly by what or by whom. That night, using Sarah's laptop, I tried accessing the site where I'd found the original files again, but the link was dead. I tried several variations of the URL, but nothing worked. It was as if the site had never existed, but I had screenshots. During my first visit to the site, I'd taken some screenshots of the files, more out of professional habit than any specific plan. I'd saved them in a folder on my Google Drive. When I tried accessing my Google Drive, I discovered my account had been suspended due to violations of terms of service. All my files, including the screenshots, were gone. Someone had methodically erased all evidence of what I'd found. The next day, I went back to work, determined not to sign Davidson's non-disclosure agreement. But Davidson didn't show up. Instead, there was a message waiting on my desk. "Laura, we hope you've made the right decision. Your cooperation is appreciated. Consider this matter closed." There was no signature, no contact information, just that cryptic message. Over the next few days, I tried to return to some semblance of normalcy. I went to work, did my usual routines, pretended nothing had happened, but I was constantly looking over my shoulder, noticing details I'd never noticed before. The white van had disappeared, but now there were other cars that seemed to appear too frequently. A blue sedan I saw 3 days in a row in different locations. A black SUV that always seemed to be a few streets behind me when I drove to work. Maybe it was paranoia. Maybe once you start looking for surveillance, you start seeing it everywhere, even when it's not there. But then the technical issues started. My phone began acting strange. It would overheat for no reason. The battery would drain much faster than normal, and it would occasionally restart on its own. My home computer started running slowly, sometimes freezing completely. One night, while working on my laptop, the webcam turned on by itself. I saw the little green light come on, and for a second, I could see my own image reflected on the screen before I managed to close the application. I put tape over the webcam that same night, but the technical problems were just the beginning. I started noticing personal information being used in ways I couldn't explain. I received marketing emails from companies I'd never interacted with, but for products that perfectly matched things I'd been looking at in stores recently. I started getting robocalls that mentioned my name and specific details about my life that weren't publicly available. One afternoon, I came home to find someone had delivered Chinese food to my door. Food I hadn't ordered, but it was exactly what I'd been craving after a particularly stressful day at work. The restaurant insisted someone had called and given my specific address and exact preferences. It was as if someone was inside my head, predicting my wants and needs before I fully recognized them myself. But it was the incident at the grocery store that finally convinced me I needed to run. I was shopping on a Saturday afternoon when a man approached me in the cereal aisle. He was older, wearing a cap like Janet had described the flower courier. "Excuse me," he said. "Are you Laura Hartwell?" I immediately went on guard. "Why?" "My granddaughter goes to the library where you work," he said, smiling in a way that was supposed to be friendly, but gave me chills. "She talks about you a lot. Says you're really helpful with finding books for kids." That was possible. I worked with a lot of kids at the library, but something about the way this man was looking at me made me deeply uncomfortable. "What's your granddaughter's name?" I asked. "Oh, she's a little one with curly hair," he said, avoiding a specific name. "Always carries a unicorn backpack." That could have described half a dozen girls who regularly visited the library. But then he said something that froze my blood. "She says you always wear the same perfume. Something floral, right? My late wife used to wear something similar. I never wear perfume. Never. I'm allergic to most fragrances. Any kid who actually knew me would know that. This man wasn't any girl's grandfather. He was someone else trying to start a conversation with me under false pretenses. "Excuse me," I mumbled, and quickly walked to another aisle. but when I looked back, he was following me. I abandoned my cart and left the grocery store immediately. In the parking lot, I could see the man standing at the store entrance, talking on the phone and clearly describing my car. That night, I packed 2 large suitcases. I called in sick to work for the rest of the week, left extra food for Whiskers, and drove straight to Minnesota to see my parents. I didn't tell them exactly what was going on, just that I'd had some harassment issues in Chicago and needed a break. My parents, bless them, didn't ask too many questions. They set me up in my old bedroom and let me process everything at my own pace. For 2 weeks, I felt safe. Minnesota seemed like a different world from the urban paranoia of Chicago. I helped my dad in the garden, went shopping with my mom, even hung out with some high school friends who still lived in the area. But then the letters started arriving. The first came on a Tuesday, addressed to me at my parents' address. No return address. Inside was a single photo, me helping my dad in the garden the day before, clearly taken from the street. The second letter came 2 days later. This photo showed me at the mall with my mom, taken from what looked like a store on the second floor. The third letter had no photo, just a message. Minnesota is beautiful this time of year, but you can't hide forever. Laura, my parents realized something was seriously wrong when the fourth letter arrived. This one contained multiple photos of their house taken from different angles, along with a floor plan showing the exact layout of the house, including my bedroom. Laura, my dad said that night, after I showed him the letters, you need to call the FBI. This is beyond what local police can handle. He was right, but I was also afraid that involving federal authorities might make everything worse. What if Davidson really worked for some government agency? What if filing a formal complaint only confirmed I was a security threat that needed to be silenced permanently? But the decision was made for me the next day. I woke around 3 a.m. to the sound of my parents' house alarm going off. My dad ran downstairs to check the doors and windows while my mom called the local police. There were no signs of forced entry. All the doors and windows were secure. But on the kitchen table, there was a note that definitely hadn't been there when we went to bed. Laura, it's time to come home. Your cat misses you, Whiskers. They'd mentioned Whiskers specifically. My cat, who I'd left in Chicago, was being used as leverage against me. The local police took a report, but it was obvious they were out of their depth. This wasn't the kind of crime they normally dealt with in a small Minnesota town. The next day, I drove back to Chicago, not because I wanted to, but because I knew involving my family would only put them in danger too. When I got to my apartment, I found Whiskers perfectly fine, but there was a new addition to the living room, a gift basket full of gourmet cat food and new toys. The card read, "Thanks for coming back. Whiskers is lucky to have you. Someone had been in my apartment while I was gone, feeding my cat and doing what else?" That night, as I lay in bed, staring at the spot where the hidden camera used to be, I made a decision. I couldn't keep living like this. I needed to end this, one way or another. The next day, using a public computer at a different library, I posted a message on several online forums. I described what I'd found on the deep web, without giving specific details, but with enough information for anyone involved to know I was talking about them. If the person or people responsible for this are reading, I wrote, I want to make a deal. Leave me alone, and I'll never talk about what I saw. Keep harassing me, and I'll make everything I know public. It was a complete bluff. I had no real evidence, no proof I could make public. but I hoped they didn't know that. The response came faster than I'd expected. That night, when I got home from work, there was someone waiting in my apartment. Not Dovison this time, but a woman who looked about 30, professionally dressed, with the kind of quiet presence that suggested dangerous competence. "Hello, Laura," she said, like we were old friends. "I'm Agent Martinez. We need to talk." "How did you get into my apartment?" I asked, though I already knew the answer. "That's not important," she said. "What's important is that you understand the situation you've put yourself in." She sat on my couch like she owned the place. "Laura, what you found wasn't part of any government operation. It was something much more private." "What does that mean?" "It means there are very powerful people who pay a lot of money for certain kinds of information. Information about people who might be useful to them in the future." "Information for what?" Martinez smiled, but it wasn't a warm expression. "For anything they might need. Blackmail, manipulation, recruitment. The possibilities are endless when you know everything about someone's life." "That's completely illegal." "Of course it is. But it's also very lucrative, and the people involved have enough resources to make problems disappear." Martinez leaned forward. "Laura, you've had bad luck. You stumbled onto something you weren't supposed to see, and now you know too much. Normally, that would be problematic for you." "Are you threatening me?" "I'm offering you a way out," she said. "My employers have decided you're more useful alive than dead, but only if you cooperate fully." "What kind of cooperation?" "You're going to move, far from Chicago. We'll give you a new identity, a new job, a fresh start, and in return, you never talk about what you saw. Ever. And if I refuse?" Martinez stood, smoothing her skirt. "Laura, you've seen evidence of our capabilities. We know where you live, where you work, where your family lives. We can reach you anytime, anywhere." She pulled a tablet from her bag and showed it to me. On the screen was a live feed of my parents' house in Minnesota. I could see my dad working in the garden, completely unaware he was being watched. "The choice is yours," she said, "but you have until tomorrow to decide." After she left, I sat in my apartment trembling. I was caught between options that weren't really options. I could disappear into a new identity and spend the rest of my life looking over my shoulder, or I could refuse and live with the constant threat to me and my family. But there was a third option Martinez probably hadn't considered. That night, I packed everything I could fit into my car. I gave Whiskers to my neighbor down the hall, telling her it was a family emergency and I'd be back for him soon. I knew it was probably a lie, but I couldn't take him where I was going. I drove all night, straight south, not to any specific city, just away. Every few hours, I stopped to buy gas with cash and kept driving. I didn't go to my parents. I didn't call friends. I didn't use my phone or credit cards. I became a ghost. It's been 3 months since then. I've been living under different names, in different cities, working cash jobs that don't require extensive background checks. It's not a life, but it's survival. Occasionally, I get signs that they're still looking for me. A car that looks familiar, parked outside wherever I'm living. A person in a cafe who stares at me too long. Little things that might be paranoia, but I don't dare ignore. I don't know what happened to the other people in those surveillance files. I don't know if they ever found the evidence they thought I'd taken. I don't know if my family is safe. My name is Tomas. I'm 31 years old, and until 6 months ago, I was an investigative journalist for a digital newspaper in Mexico City. Specializing in organized crime and government corruption, I'd built a reputation for uncovering stories other reporters avoided because they were too dangerous. I was good at my job because I wasn't afraid of threats, dark places, or people who preferred to keep their secrets buried. That confidence nearly killed me. It all started with a tip. In March of 2024, I received an email from an anonymous source claiming to have information about a human trafficking network operating between Mexico and the United States. It wasn't unusual. I got dozens of similar emails every month. Most turned out to be conspiracy theories or baseless claims, but this email was different. It included specific photographs, license plate numbers, exact dates, and information only someone with insider access could know. The source said the network was much larger than authorities believed, and evidence was available on the deep web for anyone brave enough to look. Search for the Lazarus Project, the email said, but be careful. Once you see what they do, you can't pretend you don't know. As an investigative journalist, I'd used the deep web before to verify information and contact sources in countries with strict censorship. I had all the necessary tools: paid, VPNs, Tor properly configured, a virtual machine isolated from the rest of my systems. I thought I was prepared for whatever I'd find. I wasn't. It took 3 days of searching to find any reference to the Lazarus Project. The first sites I found were obviously fake, conspiracy theory pages full of unverified information and broken links. But I persisted, following a chain of cross-references through specialized forums and information-sharing sites. Finally, in an encrypted forum that required an invitation to access, I found a user named DeepSource who had mentioned Lazarus in a thread about unsolved crimes. I sent them a private message. Their response came 2 days later. "Are you a journalist? Government? Police?" "Journalist," I replied honestly, "investigating cross-border human trafficking." "Lazarus isn't human trafficking," they responded. "It's much worse." "Are you sure you want to know?" I said yes. DeepSource sent me a series of links with specific instructions on how to access them safely. "These sites move constantly," they wrote. "You'll have maybe 48 hours before the addresses change again. And Tomas, once you see this, you won't sleep well for a long time." The first address led me to what appeared to be an auction site, but it wasn't for normal items or services. It was for people. The homepage displayed a gallery of photographs that initially looked like normal portraits, men and women of various ages, all taken against neutral backgrounds. But as I read the descriptions accompanying each photo, I realized I was looking at something far more sinister. Subject M47, male, 28 years old, no known family, excellent physical condition, available for long-term experimental procedures, starting price $50,000. Subject F, 23, female, 31 years old, clean medical history, ideal for endurance studies, no missing person report on file, starting price $75,000. Subject M12, male, 19 years old, college student, perfect for behavioral modification protocols, stable family, but no investigative resources, starting price $85,000. The descriptions were clinical, dehumanizing. These people weren't being sold for sexual slavery or forced labor, as I'd seen in previous trafficking investigations. They were being sold for experiments. With trembling hands, I started taking screenshots, and copying information. But when I tried to access more details about the auctions, I hit a registration system that required identity verification and, more disturbingly, references from prior successful transactions. The second link Deep Source gave me was even more disturbing. It was a progress reports site documenting what happened to people after being acquired in the auctions. The reports were organized by date and subject number, with regular updates on various procedures. I opened one at random. Subject F18, Day 73 of Sensory Protocol. Subject continues to show resistance to prolonged sleep deprivation, but the introduction of high-frequency auditory stimulation has produced desired behaviors. Recommend continuing with Phase 3 of the protocol. Another. Subject M35, Day 156 of Pharmacological Protocol. Long-term effects of compound X7 have exceeded expectations. Subject has lost short-term memory formation ability, but maintains basic motor functions. Excellent for neurological manipulation studies. There were dozens of these reports, each more horrifying than the last. These weren't legitimate medical experiments conducted with informed consent. They were systematic tortures disguised as scientific research. But what truly chilled my blood was when I recognized some of the names. Subject F41, also known as Carmen Delgado, reported missing in Tijuana, January 15, 2023. Carmen Delgado. I had covered her disappearance. She was a 27-year-old nurse who vanished on her way home from the hospital where she worked. Her family had been searching for her for over a year. I'd interviewed her mother, who cried as she showed me photos of her daughter, and here was Carmen, reduced to a subject number in progress reports for illegal medical experiments. I kept reading. According to the reports, Carmen had been subjected to pain endurance studies for the first 3 months. Then they'd started psychological modification protocols. The final report, dated just 2 weeks before I found the site, described the complete success of the personality fragmentation protocol. I vomited at my desk. After cleaning myself up and taking a few minutes to process what I'd seen, I forced my attention to the third link. This one led to what took me several minutes to fully understand. It was a job recruitment site, but for a very specific audience. Are you a medical professional tired of the ethical constraints of traditional medicine? The homepage asked. A researcher frustrated by the limitations of volunteer subject studies. A scientist who wants to explore the true limits of human potential. The site offered job contracts for doctors, psychologists, pharmacologists, and other professionals to work in what they described as unregulated private research facilities. The salaries offered were astronomical, $500,000 to $2 million a year, depending on specialization and willingness for unconventional procedures. There was a section of testimonials from satisfied employees. Dr. M. After 20 years, constrained by ethics boards and informed consent, I can finally conduct the research I've always wanted. The resources are limitless, and the test subjects are fully cooperative. Dr. K. I've made breakthroughs in neuroscience that would have been impossible in a traditional university setting. Here, I can truly explore what makes the human mind tick. Dr. R. The protocols I've developed here have revolutionized my understanding of pain and human endurance. It's the most fulfilling work of my career. The site also included a section for current vacancies, psychological trauma specialist for development of interrogation techniques, experimental pharmacologist for testing unapproved compounds, general surgeon for body modification procedures, psychiatrist specializing in mind control for conditioning programs. Each vacancy included the disclaimer, absolute discretion required. History of ethical objections will disqualify candidates. By then, I'd been on the sites for nearly 6 straight hours. My eyes were burning, my stomach was churning, and my hands were trembling from adrenaline and horror. But I knew I had to keep documenting everything. The fourth link led me to what took several minutes to fully comprehend. It was a discussion forum where the people running these operations shared tips, bragged about their achievements, and coordinated activities. The usernames were cryptic: X7 Alpha, Cortex Prime, Subject 0, but the conversations were horrifyingly specific. X7 Alpha. Has anyone else noticed that subjects from urban origins tend to have greater resistance to sensory isolation protocols than those from rural origins? I'm thinking we may need to adjust our acquisition methods. Cortex Prime. I've had excellent results combining sleep deprivation with controlled hallucinogen administration. Subjects reach psychological breaking points 40% faster. Subject 0. Has anyone experimented with compound Z9 developed by the Frankfurt team? Preliminary results are promising for long-term memory modification. There were entire threads dedicated to discussing how to acquire subjects without raising suspicion, how to transport them across international borders, and how to dispose of them when they were no longer useful for experiments. One particularly disturbing thread discussed methods for identifying people who wouldn't be missed. The best subjects are socially isolated individuals, wrote someone with the username Harvester. People with no stable family, undocumented migrant workers, recovering addicts with weak support networks. Also, international college students from countries with inefficient reporting systems. I've had excellent success with people in life transitions, replied another user named Collector. People who just moved to a new city, ended long-term relationships, lost jobs. They're vulnerable and less likely to have people notice their absence immediately. As I read these exchanges, I realized I wasn't just seeing evidence of horrific crimes, but a window into the minds of the people committing them. They weren't savage monsters acting on impulse. They were calculated, organized individuals who had created an industrial system for human torture. The fifth and final link Deep Source had given me was the most disturbing of all. It was a catalog of final products, videos, and documents showcasing the outcomes of the experiments I'd been reading about. I won't describe in detail what I saw, because there are images that shouldn't exist in the world, and they certainly shouldn't be preserved in words. But I can say I saw irrefutable evidence of systematic torture, medical experiments conducted without anesthesia, surgical body modification for non-medical purposes, and brainwashing techniques that had reduced functioning people to barely human states. One video showed a young woman, maybe 25 years old, who had been subjected to what the documents called complete cognitive regression protocol. In the video, several masked doctors were conducting basic psychological tests on her. The woman was incapable of performing tasks a 5-year-old could do easily. Her responses were monosyllabic, her movements clumsy, and her eyes completely vacant. Subject F67 has achieved the desired state, said a voiceover. Memory retention limited to approximately 30 seconds. Reasoning abilities reduced to infant level. Previous personality fully erased. protocol successful. Another video showed the results of pharmacological experiments that had left a middle-aged man in a state of constant terror. No matter what the doctors told him, no matter if they showed him harmless objects like flowers or books, he screamed and tried to hide. His brain had been chemically altered to exist in a perpetual state of panic. Subject M83 demonstrates the effectiveness of compound terror 7, another doctor explained. Extreme fear stayed maintained for 47 consecutive days without interruption, excellent for studies on the psychological impact of prolonged fear. There were dozens of these videos. Each one meticulously documented the systematic destruction of a human being. After 6 hours of watching these things, I had to stop. I ran out of my home office and vomited in the backyard until there was nothing left in my stomach. I stayed there, kneeling in the grass, trembling and trying to process what I'd seen, but I knew I had work to do. This was the most important story of my career, possibly one of the most significant exposés of crimes against humanity in the modern era. I had to document everything and find a way to expose it. I spent the next 3 days organizing the information I'd gathered, verifying details when possible, and trying to connect what I'd seen on the deep web with missing persons cases I could investigate through traditional channels. I found at least 12 cases that matched. People who had disappeared in circumstances that would allow the perpetrators to claim they wouldn't be missed, and who had appeared as subjects in the reports I'd found online. Carmen Delgado was just the tip of the iceberg. There was also Miguel Santos, an undocumented construction worker who had vanished in Phoenix 6 months earlier. In the files, he appeared as Subject M52, subjected to extreme physical endurance studies. Ana Morales, an exchange student from Colombia who had disappeared in Miami. Subject F34, used for language and memory modification protocols. Roberto Jimenez, a homeless man from Los Angeles who no one had reported missing. Subject M71, subject of prolonged nutritional deprivation experiments. Each case was an individual tragedy, but taken together, they revealed an operation of a scale and sophistication that took my breath away. While I was working on organizing this information for publication, I started noticing strange things. First, there were minor technical issues. My computer started running slower, occasionally freezing, and some of my files appeared to have become corrupted. I initially attributed it to the stress I'd put on my system during the days of intense research, but then I started getting strange phone calls that rang only once before disconnecting, always at specific times: 3:33 a.m., 6:66 a.m., which would technically be 7:06 a.m., 9:99 p.m., 10:39 p.m. The numbers were always different, but the pattern was consistent. One night, around 2 a.m., while I was working on my article, my phone rang. This time, it didn't disconnect after one ring. "Hello," I answered. There was silence for a moment, then a distorted voice, clearly modified by software. "Tomas Rivera, investigative journalist." It wasn't a question, it was a statement. "Who is this?" I asked. "Someone who knows what you've been looking at on the deep web for the past week." My blood ran cold. How could they know that? I'd used every security precaution, VPNs, Tor, an isolated virtual machine. "I don't know what you're talking about," I lied. "Tomas, we know you access the Lazarus sites. We know you've been taking screenshots. We know you've been correlating our subjects with missing persons, cases, our subjects. There was no pretense that this was a mistake or misunderstanding. Whoever was on the phone was part of the operation I'd uncovered. "What do you want?" I asked. "We want you to understand something very important, Tomas. What you've seen, that research is saving lives. The procedures we document are developing treatments for diseases that have plagued humanity for millennia. The sacrifices we make are necessary for the progress of medical science." Sacrifices? You're torturing innocent people. Tomas, have you ever wondered how anesthetics were developed? Antibiotics, vaccines. They all required experimentation that doesn't meet modern ethical standards. We're simply continuing that tradition of sacrifice in the name of scientific progress. That's a sick rationalization for war crimes. It's a perspective that transcends conventional moral constraints, the voice replied calmly. But I didn't call to debate ethics, Tomas. I called to make you an offer. What kind of offer? Forget what you saw. Destroy all the evidence you've collected. Never publish anything about the Lazarus Project. And in return, we'll let you continue your life. And if I refuse? There was a long pause. Then the voice continued. Tomas, you've seen evidence of our capabilities. You know what we can do. You know how easy it would be for you to become one of our research subjects. You can't just make a well-known journalist disappear. Can't we? Tomas, let me read you something. There was the sound of papers being shuffled. Tomas Rivera, 31 years old, lives alone in Colonia Roma. No immediate family in Mexico City. Has been working from home for the past 6 months due to budget cuts at his newspaper. His neighbors rarely see him. His lead editor is considering firing him due to a recent decline in the quality of his work. Every detail was correct, even things I thought only I knew. If you disappeared tomorrow, Tomas, how long would it take for someone to notice? A week? 2 weeks? And when someone finally reported your absence, what would they find? A struggling journalist with financial problems who had been acting erratically in recent weeks. My editors would know I was working on a major story. The organ trafficking story you've been working on for the past 3 months. Yes, we know about that too. A completely different story, with no connection to anything you've seen online recently. How? Tomas, we've been watching you for much longer than you think. Since that anonymous email led you to us, what you've seen over the past weeks wasn't an accident. It was a test. A test. We wanted to see how far you'd go, how deep you'd dig, how well you document what you found. And I must say, we're impressed. Your methodology was excellent, your cross-referencing was thorough, and your evidence organization was highly professional. A terrible chill started settling in my stomach. What are you talking about? Tomas, we've been looking for someone with your specific skills. A meticulous investigator with experience in organized crime, someone who doesn't scare easily, someone who can document complex processes clearly and comprehensively. For what? To join us, to help us document our work from the inside, to become our official chronicler. The proposal was so surreal that for a moment I couldn't process what they were suggesting. You're offering me a job? We are offering you the opportunity of your career. Full access to revolutionary medical research, the chance to document scientific breakthroughs that will change the world, and of course, compensation that exceeds anything you've ever earned as a journalist. Revolutionary medical research. That's what you call systematic torture. Tomas, I invite you to broaden your perspective. Did you know that our neurological modification protocols have resulted in potential treatments for Alzheimer's and Parkinson's? That our pain endurance studies have led to analgesics that could eliminate chronic suffering for millions of people? And the human cost? Approximately 200 subjects per year, carefully selected from at-risk populations. In comparison, traditional clinical trials result in thousands of deaths annually and produce a fraction of the useful data we generate. The cold, calculated way they spoke about human lives as statistics turned my stomach. I'd never work for you. Tomas, you have until tomorrow at noon to reconsider. After that, we'll have to proceed with alternative measures. What alternative measures? You'll become part of our studies. And I must say, a subject with your level of education and intelligence would be extremely valuable for our cognitive modification protocols. They hung up. That night, I didn't sleep at all. I sat in my office, all the lights on, trying to decide what to do. Every option seemed to lead to terrible consequences. If I published the story immediately, as it was, I might alert the authorities, but could also provoke immediate retaliation against me. If I didn't publish, these operations would continue, and more innocent people would be victimized. But there was a third option I'd been considering. Around 4 a.m., I started preparing a comprehensive information package. All the documents I'd collected, the screenshots of the sites, my analysis of the correlation with missing persons cases, and a complete narrative of everything I'd discovered. But instead of preparing it for immediate publication, I set it up as a dead man switch, an automated system that would send all the information to a dozen international news organizations, law enforcement agencies, and human rights organizations if it didn't receive a specific signal from me every 48 hours. If something happened to me, if I disappeared or died under suspicious circumstances, all the information would be released automatically. I spent the rest of the night setting up this system, using servers in multiple countries to ensure it couldn't be easily disabled. The next day, at 11:50 a.m., my phone rang. Tomas, we're awaiting your decision. I have a counter-proposal, I said. Oh, you leave me alone. Let me continue my normal life. And in return, I won't immediately publish the information I have. But if something happens to me, if I disappear or have a convenient accident, all the evidence goes public, automatically. There was a long pause. That's a clever strategy, Tomas. But it's based on some incorrect assumptions. What assumptions? The assumption that we care if this information goes public. That wasn't what I'd expected to hear. What do you mean? Tomas, do you really think we operate in such secrecy that exposure would destroy us? We've been operating for over a decade. We have contracts with governments, pharmaceutical corporations, and military institutions. Many of our victims, as you call them, were handed over by the same authorities you think will arrest us. That's impossible. Is it? Tomas, where do you think black budget military programs come from? Classified research programs. The experiments governments have been conducting on their own citizens for decades. Even if that's true, public exposure would force nothing, they interrupted. There'll be a public investigation. Some convenient scapegoats will be found. There'll be cosmetic legislative reform, and the operations will continue under different names in different locations. It can't be that simple. Tomas, do you remember MK Ultra, the CIA's experiments over decades, the Nazi medical experiments that were adopted by Allied governments after the war. History is full of exposés of similar programs, and you know what happens. People are outraged for a few weeks, then they move on with their lives. Then why threaten me if you don't care about exposure? Because we prefer to operate without unnecessary attention, and because we have another use for you. I already told you I won't work for you. Not as an employee, Tomas. As a subject. My blood ran cold again. What? You've demonstrated exceptional investigative and analytical skills. It would be fascinating to study how those skills can be modified, enhanced, or transferred to other subjects. A brain like yours would be invaluable for our cognitive enhancement protocols. You're insane. We're being pragmatic. Tomas, no matter what you choose to do today, your life as you know it is over. The question is whether you cooperate voluntarily and experience relatively comfortable procedures, or resist and experience the more intensive protocols. Where are you? When are you coming for me? Tomas, we're already here. I looked out my office window. In the street was a black van I hadn't seen before. As I watched, the side door opened, and several men in civilian clothes started walking toward my building. Don't run, Tomas. It'll only make things worse. I hung up the phone and ran to the back door of my apartment. But when I opened it, 2 more men were waiting for me in the alley. Mr. Rivera, one of them said calmly, please come with us. This doesn't have to be difficult. For a moment, I considered shouting, fighting, trying to draw attention from the neighbors, but I knew it was pointless. These people had demonstrated a level of organization and resources that made any resistance completely futile. Can I grab some things? I asked. That won't be necessary, the man replied. Everything you need will be provided. As they escorted me to the van, my last coherent thought was a desperate hope that my dead man's switch system would work, that when I didn't send the required signal, in 48 hours, all the information I'd collected would go public. But even as I had that thought, I knew it was probably a vain hope. If these people had the resources and connections they claimed, they'd likely already identified and neutralized my precautions. The last thing I remember before they injected something into my arm was the man in the van saying, "Relax, Mr. Rivera. You're going to be part of something much bigger now. I've been awake for, I'm not sure how long. Days and nights blur together here. There are no windows, no clocks, and the lights never fully turn off. They call me Subject J8 now. J for journalist, I suppose. Their little joke. The facilities are exactly what you'd expect after seeing the videos. Clinical, surgical, sterile. There are dozens of rooms, each designed for different types of protocols. My room is relatively comfortable because I'm still in what they call orientation phase. Dr. Sarah Chen is my primary investigator. She's a woman in her 40s, likely Asian American, with a neuroscience PhD from Stanford. She's polite, professional, and talks about the procedures they're going to perform on me with the same casualness a mechanic might use to discuss changing motor oil. Tomas, your case is particularly interesting, she told me during our first session. We want to understand how your brain processed the information you found, how you organized complex patterns, how you maintained emotional objectivity while documenting disturbing material. Are you going to kill me? Oh no, Tomas. You're far more valuable alive, but we're going to make some adjustments to how your mind works. Nothing painful, necessarily. Just modifications. She explained that over the next few weeks, I'd be subjected to a series of procedures designed to fully map my brain function. High-resolution scans, brainwave pattern analysis, injections of markers that would let them track how different parts of my brain communicated with each other. Once we fully understand how your mind works, she continued, we'll begin the modification experiments. We want to see if we can isolate and transfer your analytical skills to other subjects. Imagine the potential, creating perfect investigators, enhanced analysts, minds designed specifically to process complex information. And what happens to me after you extract what you want? Dr. Chen smiled. Tomas, if everything goes well, you'll remain conscious throughout the process. You'll be able to observe and document your own cognitive modification. From a scientific perspective, it'll be fascinating. And if something goes wrong, well, there's always the risk of collateral damage during experimental procedures. But even if you lose some higher functions, you'll still be valuable for our other research protocols. That conversation was, I'm not sure how long ago. Time works differently here, but since then, I've been subjected to procedures almost daily. The brain scans are the easy part, hours lying still while machines analyze every aspect of my neurological function. But then there are the behavioral analysis sessions. They present me with complex problems, real crime cases, logic puzzles, data analysis, while monitors record every aspect of my brain activity. Dr. Chen and her team watch from behind one-way glass, taking notes on how my mind processes information. Excellent, Dr. Chen always says after these sessions. Your brain shows unique patterns when faced with complex information. We can definitely replicate this, but the sessions that truly terrify me are the emotional response tests. They show me videos, some of the same torture videos I'd seen on the deep web, others even worse. While I watch, monitors record my physiological responses, heart rate, blood pressure, brain activity, hormone levels. We want to understand how you maintain professional objectivity while documenting such disturbing material, Dr. Chen explains. If we can isolate the neurological mechanisms that allow emotional detachment, we could create investigators who are never compromised by emotional responses. Yesterday, or what I think was yesterday, they started with injections. These are experimental compounds that will temporarily enhance certain cognitive functions, Dr. Chen told me as she prepared the syringe. We want to see how your brain responds to chemical enhancement. The first compound made me feel like my mind had been put into overdrive. I could process information with a speed and clarity I'd never experienced. Problems that would normally take me hours to solve, I completed in minutes, but it came with side effects, intense paranoia, minor visual hallucinations, and what Dr. Chen described as empathy suppression. I completely lost the ability to feel compassion or emotional connection with other people. Fascinating, she said, reviewing my results. The compound definitely enhances logical analysis, but at the cost of emotional function. We'll need to find the right balance. The second compound was different. It made me more creative, able to see connections between ideas I wouldn't normally associate, but it also made me completely unable to focus on one thing for more than a few minutes. We're mapping how different chemicals affect different aspects of cognition, Dr. Chen explained. Eventually, we'll be able to create precise cocktails that enhance specific skills without negative side effects. How long will this last? Tomas, we've only just begun. Fully mapping your brain function will take at least 3 months. After that, we'll start with the more permanent modifications. What kind of modifications? Well, we want to try transferring your analytical skills to other subjects using a combination of neural tissue transplantation, gene therapy, and intensive neurological conditioning. Neural tissue transplantation. You're going to take parts of my brain, only small sections initially, enough to isolate the specific neural networks we want to replicate. And of course, we'll replace the extracted tissue with synthetic implants that will maintain basic functions. And if the implants don't work, well, there's the possibility of cognitive degradation, memory loss, language loss, personality changes. But Tomas, even in the worst case scenario, you'd still be useful for our other research protocols. Last night, or what I think was last night, they brought in a new subject. I could hear screams from the hallway, then the sound of multiple people struggling with someone who clearly didn't want to cooperate. Then, silence. This morning, during my supervised exercise session, they allow me 30 minutes daily in a small gym. I saw through the window of a procedure room a young woman being prepared for what looked like surgery. It was Carmen Delgado, the nurse whose disappearance I'd covered, whose case had been one of the first I correlated with the subject files I found online. But she didn't look like the photos her family had shown me during my original investigation. Her hair had been shaved short, she'd lost significant weight, and her eyes had the same vacant look I'd seen in the final product videos. When I tried to get her attention to let her know I recognized her, there was no response. She didn't even seem to register that another person was looking at her. Carmen Delgado, the nurse I talked to about her plans to open her own clinic one day, had been reduced to an object for experimentation. Dr. Chen noticed me watching. Ah, yes, subject F41. She's been one of our most successful stories. We completed the cognitive modification protocol 6 months ago. What did you do to her? Complete suppression of previous personality, implantation of new behavioral patterns, and physical modification for optimization of future procedures. She's one of our first subjects to achieve what we call maximum utility state. Maximum utility state. Fully cooperative, no emotional or psychological resistance, perfectly adaptable to any research protocol we need to implement. In essence, she's a perfect platform for experimentation. Does she still know who she used to be? Oh no, all personal memories were erased during the first month of treatment. She has no recollection of her previous life, her family, her career. It's much more efficient that way. That night, I lay awake, thinking about Carmen and what I'd seen. I also thought about my dead man switch system and the increasingly slim chance that my information had been released. It's been at least 2 weeks since I was captured, probably more. If my system had worked, there should be evidence of public exposure by now. But the conversations I overhear among the staff don't suggest any change in their operations or any external pressure. They were probably right. They probably identified and neutralized my precautions before they could activate, which means no one knows where I am. No one is looking for me, and no one is going to stop whatever they have planned for me. Something changed today. During my usual session with Dr. Chen, I noticed she seemed excited in a way I hadn't seen before. Tomas, we have exceptional news, she said, reviewing a tablet full of data I couldn't see clearly. The analysis of your neurological patterns has produced even better results than we anticipated. What kind of results? We've identified exactly the neural networks responsible for your analytical skills. And more importantly, we've developed a method to extract and preserve those networks in a way that they can be successfully transplanted to other subjects. Transplanted? Yes. Normally, neural tissue is very difficult to transplant because it tends to be rejected by the host brain. But we've developed new immunosuppressive techniques that allow full integration. Dr. Chen sat in the chair across from me, her expression almost maternal. Tomas, you're going to be part of something revolutionary. Your cognitive skills are going to live on forever, transferred from subject to subject, enhancing the investigative capacity of dozens, potentially hundreds of people. You're going to take my brain? Not all at once, of course, just the sections we've identified as critical to your unique skills. The initial procedure will extract approximately 15% of your prefrontal cortex, along with specific sections of your temporal lobe. And what about me? Will I survive that? Of course. The synthetic implants will maintain basic functions. You'll experience some cognitive changes, obviously, but you'll retain consciousness and basic personality. What kind of cognitive changes? Dr. Chen consulted her notes. Likely significant short-term memory loss, reduced abstract reasoning abilities, and some personality modification. But Tomas, you'll still be aware of what's happening. For what? If I no longer have the skills you want to study, why keep me alive? Because you'll be our long-term control subject. We'll be able to study the effects of the extraction procedure by observing you for months or years post-surgery. Plus, once we reduce your higher cognitive functions, you'll be perfect for our behavioral modification protocols. The casual way she described the systematic destruction of my mind filled me with horror. When? Tomorrow morning. We've already prepared the recipients for the first experimental transplants. Recipients. Other subjects who will receive portions of your neural tissue. We want to see how effectively we can transfer your skills to brains with different cognitive structures. That night, I couldn't sleep, not just because of the prospect of brain surgery tomorrow, but because of the realization that whatever's left of me after the procedure won't really be me. Tomas Rivera, the investigative journalist who exposed government corruption and organized crime, would cease to exist. In his place would be something that looked human, but functioned more like a lab animal. But as I lay there, waiting for dawn, I realized there was one more thing I could do. Over the past weeks, I'd been carefully observing the staff's routines, the security protocols, the layout of the facilities. As an investigative journalist, observing and memorizing details was as natural as breathing. If I was going to lose my mind tomorrow, I could at least try to document what I'd seen here before it was too late. I don't have much time. I can hear activity in the hallway, suggesting they're preparing for the procedure. For the past hour, I've been writing in a small notebook I managed to take from Dr. Chen's office during a session yesterday. I've written everything I can remember about the facilities, the staff, the procedures I've witnessed, and the other subjects I've seen. The facilities are located in what seems to be an extensive underground complex, likely built within or beneath an existing building. There are at least 3 levels, with over 50 rooms dedicated to different types of research. The staff includes at least 12 doctors with various specialties, 20 nurses and technicians, and an undetermined number of security personnel. Many of them speak with accents suggesting international origins: German, Russian, Chinese. I've seen approximately 30 other subjects during my time here, though there are likely many more. Their ages range from late teens to middle age. About 60% are male, 40% female. Many show signs of extensive physical or cognitive modification. The procedures I've witnessed or heard about include neurological modification, brain tissue extraction, and implantation, pharmacological experiments, testing experimental drugs, psychological conditioning, brainwashing, personality modification, physical modification, non-medical surgeries, device implantation, endurance studies, systematic torture disguised as research. The results of these experiments are meticulously documented and apparently shared with external organizations. I've heard references to government clients and military applications. The operation clearly has significant resources and political connections. The medical equipment is state-of-the-art, the facilities are vast and sophisticated, and the staff seems to operate without fear of legal interference. I can hear footsteps approaching my room. I have no idea what I'm going to do with this information, considering that in a few hours I won't be able to process it coherently anymore. But maybe, if I'm lucky, some part of what used to be Tomas Rivera will survive the procedure long enough to find a way to get this information to the outside world. Or maybe, if I'm really lucky, someone else will ask the right questions and pursue the kind of investigation that led me here. The door is opening. Dr. Chen is coming in with several technicians. "Good morning, Tomas," she says cheerfully. "Are you ready to make history? If anyone is reading this someday, remember, curiosity can be dangerous, but ignorance is far worse. Keep asking questions, keep digging, keep searching for the truth, no matter how terrible it might be. And if you ever find evidence of something called the Lazarus Project, don't make the same mistakes I did. Make sure the whole world knows before it's too late. My name is Tomas Rivera, and this is what I found in the depths of the internet. And now, they're going to take it all away from me. I found this notebook in my room. I don't know how it got here. My name is... I can't remember my name, but I think I'm important. I think I used to know important things. Someone should know this. Someone should... I can't think of the right words, but this is bad, very bad, and it keeps happening. If someone finds this, please help. I don't know where we are, but there are many of us, and they do terrible things to us, and no one knows we're here. Please help us. End of note. My name is Elena Vasquez, and until 4 months ago, I was an IT technician for an insurance company in Bogota. I'm 29 years old, live alone, and for most of my adult life, I've been what you might call an internet addict. Not in a destructive way, but in the sense that I was genuinely fascinated with exploring every corner of the web, from specialized forums to niche communities that most people would never encounter. My technical knowledge allowed me to navigate online spaces that were beyond the reach of average users. I'd explored the deep web, occasionally for years, mostly out of academic curiosity, and to better understand anonymity technologies I studied as part of my cybersecurity work. I never sought out anything illegal or dangerous. My interest was purely technical: how Tor networks functioned, how hidden services were structured, how people maintained anonymity online. It was like studying architecture by visiting interesting buildings. That innocent curiosity nearly cost me my life. It all began on a Friday night in October of 2024. I'd finished an especially stressful week at work. We were implementing new security protocols after a hacking attempt, and decided to unwind by exploring some tour sites I'd bookmarked but never visited. One of these sites was a forum supposedly discussing advanced cryptography techniques. A colleague had shared the link months earlier, saying it had interesting information about encryption implementations not publicly documented. When I accessed the forum, it seemed legitimate. There were technical discussions about encryption algorithms, debates on network protocol vulnerabilities, and analyses of security systems, the kind of content you'd expect in a community of cybersecurity specialists. But as I browsed the discussion threads, I noticed something odd. There were occasional references to something called the network, always capitalized. At first, I thought it referred to the internet in general, but the context didn't fit. Anyone else having trouble accessing the network this week? One user asked. The new shows on the network have been exceptional, another commented, especially the Tuesday night series. Any newbies know how to get invites to the network? I've been waiting months. These references were scattered in seemingly normal tech discussions, as if they were a code or inside reference only certain members would understand. My technical curiosity kicked in. I started searching the forum for more mentions of the network using the search function to find earlier references. What I found was a consistent pattern. Established forum users occasionally mentioned the network in contexts suggesting it was a separate service or site, one that required a special invitation to access. After an hour of digging, I found a buried thread where a user asked for help setting up initial access to the network. The responses were cryptic, but included specific technical instructions about Tor configuration, specific VPN usage, and what appeared to be addresses for hidden services. One response included what was clearly a link, a long string of random characters followed by .onion. Out of professional curiosity, I decided to see what would happen if I accessed that link. The page that loaded was completely black with minimalist white text in the center. The network premium entertainment for select audiences. Invitation required. Below was a simple form asking for an access code. Without the code, I obviously couldn't proceed beyond that page, but there was something about the design that unsettled me. It wasn't sophisticated or polished like you'd expect from a legitimate invite-only site. It was austere in a way that suggested function was more important than form, as if designed by people more interested in utility than impressing users. I returned to the original forum and started more aggressively searching for references to access codes for the network. It took another 2 hours, but I eventually found a thread where a user shared what appeared to be a temporary code. To celebrate tonight's special show, the user had written, here's a 24-hour guest pass. Guest 24/7 temp. The post was timestamped just 3 hours earlier. I decided to try my luck. I returned to the network site and entered the code. To my surprise, it worked. The black page vanished, replaced by what looked like a premium entertainment portal. The homepage had a clean professional design with sections for live shows, archive, upcoming events, and premium membership. It looked like a streaming service, perhaps for exclusive or niche content. But as I explored the sections, I quickly realized this wasn't conventional entertainment. The live shows section listed currently active streams. The titles were vague but unsettling. Endurance Session 47, Live Now, 234 viewers. Isolation Experiment Day 12, Live Now, 156 viewers. Interrogation Protocol Level 3, Live Now, 189 viewers. Each entry included a small preview window showing a blurry still image of what appeared to be a dark room. I couldn't make out specific details in the previews, but something about their quality and composition suggested they weren't staged or fictional. For a moment, I considered closing the site and pretending I'd never found it, but my professional and honestly morbid curiosity pushed me to keep exploring. I clicked on Archive to view past content. The archive page was organized by date, with hundreds of entries going back several years. Each had a descriptive title, duration, and view count. Subject F 23, Pain Endurance Test, 2 hours, 34 minutes, 17 seconds, 1,247 views. Intensive Psychological Interrogation, 4 hours, 12 minutes, 45 seconds, 892 views. Sensory Deprivation Experiment, 6 hours, 7 minutes, 23 seconds, 1,634 views. The view counts were what truly disturbed me. These weren't small numbers suggesting a niche group of sick individuals. They indicated a substantial audience for this content. With increasingly trembling hands, I clicked on one of the archive entries. A new page opened with a video player and a detailed description. Subject M31, male, 34 years old, unknown origin, interrogation session using advanced psychological techniques. Objective, determine limits of mental endurance before complete collapse. Procedure duration, 3 hours, 47 minutes. Outcome, complete success. Below the description were detailed statistics, average view time, audience ratings, and, most disturbingly, a viewer comments section. I didn't play the video. Even without watching it, I knew I was looking at documentation of real torture, but I kept reading the comments, hoping to find evidence that this was some elaborate fiction. I didn't. The comments were detailed, technical, and discussed the procedures as if they were legitimate entertainment. Excellent work on the psychological destabilization phase. The subject held out longer than I expected. Will you continue with this subject, or was it a one-off session? I'd love to see how they respond to more aggressive techniques. Audio quality could use improvement. It was hard to hear some of the subject's responses in the last 20 minutes. Any plans for more similar content? These types of sessions are my favorite. These weren't comments from people pretending to engage in a fantasy. They were from people genuinely invested in watching real torture as entertainment. I slammed my laptop shut and sat in my apartment, trying to process what I'd found. For the next 2 hours, I tried to convince myself I'd misinterpreted what I'd seen. Maybe it was extremely well-produced fictional content. Maybe it was some kind of virtual reality experience. Maybe it was an elaborate internet prank I didn't understand. But the more I thought about it, the more details I recalled that suggested what I'd seen was real. The amateur quality of some videos, the authentic ambient sounds, the reactions of the victims that seemed too genuine to be acting. And then there were the numbers. Hundreds of videos, thousands of views, a sophisticated technical infrastructure to support live streaming. This wasn't a hobby for a few sick individuals. It was a commercial operation. That night, I couldn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw those blurry preview windows, those casual comments about torture, those view counts indicating a massive audience for real human suffering. By morning, I'd made a decision. I had to know more, not because I wanted to see more of the horrific content I'd found, but because if this was real, if there was truly an organized network producing and distributing documentation of actual torture, someone had to do something about it. And as a tech professional with the skills to investigate complex websites, maybe that someone was me. Over the weekend, I dedicated every free moment to investigating the network more deeply. First, I tried to understand the technical infrastructure. Using network analysis tools, I determined the site was hosted on multiple geographically distributed servers, likely for redundancy and resistance to takedowns. The servers appeared to be located in countries with lax internet regulations and little cooperation with international authorities. The architecture was sophisticated, with multiple encryption layers and automated failover systems. Whoever was operating the network had serious technical and financial resources. I also investigated the user structure. Through the temporary access code, I gained entry to internal discussion forums where the network's members discussed content, made specific requests, and even paid for custom content. The forums revealed that the network operated on a tiered membership model. Guests, temporary, limited access to basic content. Basic, members, full archive access, ability to comment. Premium members, access to live shows, ability to make requests. Sponsors, ability to commission specific content, access to special events. Membership prices were astronomical. Premium membership cost $5,000 per year. The sponsor level cost $50,000 per year, plus additional fees for commissioned content. But what truly terrified me was discovering there were waiting lists for higher membership tiers. This wasn't a service struggling to find clients. It was so popular they had to limit access. In the member forums, I could see discussions about upcoming acquisitions. Apparently, new victims to be added to the network's catalog. Members voted on what type of content they wanted to see, and the operators apparently fulfilled these requests. Could we get more content with young female subjects? One user asked. The last 3 shows have all been middle-aged men. I've been waiting for more psychological interrogation content, another wrote. The physical experiments are fine, but I prefer the shows where we can see complete mental collapse. Any chance of getting subjects with specific professional backgrounds, doctors, police, military? It'd be interesting to see how different training affects endurance. These requests were regularly fulfilled. The upcoming shows calendar included descriptions matching exactly what members had asked for. But the most disturbing of all were the success stories shared by long-term members. A user named Longtime Viewer had written a detailed post about how the network had evolved over the 5 years they'd been a member. When I first joined, the content was more amateur, they wrote. Low-quality videos, poor audio, less sophisticated procedures, but the operators have really perfected their craft. The videos are now professional quality production with multiple cameras, clear audio, and medically informed procedures that maximize desired outcomes. They've also significantly expanded their acquisition capabilities. They used to be limited mostly to local subjects, but now they operate internationally. The available subject catalog is far more diverse now. Most impressive is how they have developed techniques for long-term procedures. Shows used to last a few hours at most. Now they have subjects in multi-month programs with new content each week documenting the progression. As I read this, I realized I wasn't looking at evidence of a small group of sadists operating out of a basement. This was a sophisticated commercial organization that had been growing and professionalizing for years, and they had clients worldwide willing to pay huge sums to watch real torture and murder. During my weekend investigation, I also tried to find information about the victims shown in the content. Using facial recognition and image comparison techniques, I managed to identify at least 3 people who appeared in the network's videos and matched reported missing persons cases in the media. One was Jessica Martinez, a 22-year-old nursing student who had vanished in Medellin 6 months earlier. Her family had been desperately searching for her, appearing in local news, organizing search campaigns. On the network, she appeared as Subject F-18 in a series of videos titled Psychological Endurance Experiment. The videos documented weeks of systematic psychological torture. The final video in the series, uploaded 2 months ago, was titled Subject F-18 Final Resolution. I didn't have the courage to play that video, but the viewer comments made it clear. Jessica Martinez had been killed for the entertainment of a paying audience. Another victim I identified was Carlos Ruiz, a 35-year-old accountant who had disappeared in Cali 8 months earlier. On the network, he appeared as Subject M47 in a series called Extreme Interrogation Protocol. There were over 20 videos in this series, documenting months of gradually escalating torture. The third victim was the most disturbing because her disappearance had been reported just 2 weeks earlier. Andrea Sanchez, a 28-year-old teacher from Cartagena, had been reported missing by her family when she didn't return from a shopping trip. Her case had appeared on social media and local news. On the network, there were already 2 videos featuring her as Subject F-27, with more scheduled for the following week. Andrea Sanchez was still alive, still being tortured, and there was an audience of hundreds paying to watch her suffering in real time. That realization made me vomit. After the weekend, I knew I had to contact the authorities, but I also knew I needed more evidence than what I'd gathered so far. Screenshots and personal testimony could easily be dismissed as fakes or exaggerations. I needed irrefutable proof. Over the next week, I meticulously documented every aspect of the network I could access. I took screenshots of member lists, transaction records, event calendars, and internal forum discussions. I also started tracking the financial transactions. The network accepted payments in multiple cryptocurrencies, but also had systems for converting fiat currency through sophisticated laundering services. I identified at least 12 cryptocurrency wallets associated with the operation, with transactions suggesting annual revenues in the millions of dollars. But it was during this intensive investigation that I made my first critical mistake. While exploring the network's internal forums, I found a section called Recruitment that I hadn't noticed before. This section contained discussions about how the operators identified and acquired new victims. The methods were systematic and terrifyingly effective. Target identification. Socially isolated individuals with weak support networks, unlikely to be missed quickly. Dash. Preliminary surveillance. Observing routines, identifying vulnerabilities, mapping behavioral patterns. Acquisition strategies. Methods for abducting victims without raising immediate suspicion. Transport protocols. how to move victims across international borders undetected. But what disturbed me most were the discussions about potential future acquisitions. This section contained detailed profiles of people identified as possible future victims, complete with photographs, personal information, and acquisition viability analyses. And there, on page 3 of potential acquisitions, I found my own photo. Elena Vasquez, 29 years old, IT technician in Bogota, lives alone, predictable routines, no immediate family in the city. Viability rating, high, status, preliminary investigation in progress. Below my photo was information that could only have been obtained through extensive surveillance. My exact address, work schedule, places I shopped for groceries, even details about my online browsing habits. Subject shows interest in advanced technology and deep web exploration. My profile continued. Excellent potential for technical interrogation protocols. Personality type suggests high initial resistance, but eventual satisfactory collapse. At the bottom of the profile was a note dated just 3 days earlier. Active surveillance authorized. Proceed with acquisition preparation. My blood ran cold. Not only had I found evidence of a torture and murder network, but I had become their next target. I immediately closed my laptop and ran to my apartment window. The street looked normal. A few pedestrians, light traffic, nothing obviously suspicious. But now that I knew I was being watched, every person on the street, every parked car, every movement outside my window felt potentially threatening. I called the police immediately. The conversation didn't go well. So you're saying you found a website where they torture people live? The officer on the phone repeated, his tone clearly suggesting skepticism. Yes, and they have my personal information. I think they're going to try to kidnap me. Mom, we get a lot of calls about weird things people see online. Most of them are fiction, special effects, that kind of thing. This isn't fiction. I've identified real victims who match missing persons cases. Have you reported this through appropriate channels? Have you contacted organizations that handle cybercrime? I spent the next hour being transferred between departments, explaining the situation repeatedly to officers who clearly didn't grasp the severity of what I'd found. Eventually, I got someone to take a formal report, but it was obvious they weren't treating it as a high priority. We'll send someone to review your information tomorrow, they finally told me. In the meantime, avoid visiting those problematic websites. That night, I didn't stay in my apartment. I packed a small bag and went to a hotel on the other side of the city, paying in cash and checking in under a fake name. But even at the hotel, I didn't feel safe. If the network truly had the resources and sophistication I'd seen in their operation, a cheap hotel wouldn't be enough to protect me. Over the next 48 hours, while waiting for the police to take my report seriously, I continued documenting evidence about the network. But now I had to be much more careful about how I accessed the information. Using public computers at internet cafes, libraries, and universities, I kept gathering evidence. I also started contacting international human rights organizations, cybercrime law enforcement agencies, and investigative journalists who had covered similar cases. It was during this extended investigation that I discovered the network was only part of something much larger. There were references in the internal forums to sister organizations operating similar services but with different specializations. The market, apparently focused on selling people for slavery. The laboratory, specialized in illegal medical experiments. The arena, live shows where victims were forced to fight to the death. The Academy, training and conditioning victims for various purposes. Each organization had its own technical infrastructure, but shared resources, information, and even victims. It was an international network of human trafficking operating entirely on the deep web, with clients in dozens of countries. The numbers were staggering. Based on partial financial records I accessed, this network of organizations had annual revenues in the tens of millions of dollars. It employed hundreds of people in roles ranging from acquisition specialists to doctors and video technicians, and it processed thousands of victims each year. The scale of the operation completely overwhelmed me. This wasn't just a group of criminals operating out of hideouts. It was an entire industry built around the commercialization of human suffering. But as I gathered this evidence, I also realized my personal situation was deteriorating rapidly. I started noticing the same white van parked near the different locations where I used public computers. When I changed my pattern and started using entirely different locations, the van appeared again within a few days. I also received strange calls on my cell phone, calls that rang once and disconnected, always at specific times. And when I checked my email account, I found messages I didn't remember seeing before. Eleanor, we know you've been very busy lately, enjoying your new investigative hobby. It would be a shame if something happened to you before you could share what you've learned. The messages came from obviously fake addresses, but the fact that they had access to my personal email suggested they'd compromised my online accounts. A week after my initial call to the police, a detective finally came to take my formal statement. Detective Rodriguez was younger than I'd expected, clearly more comfortable with technology than most of the officers I'd spoken to previously. I spent 3 hours showing him all the evidence I'd gathered: screenshots, transaction records, victim profiles, technical analyses of the network's infrastructure. "This is incredible," he said finally, reviewing pages of documentation. "If this is real, we're talking about one of the most sophisticated organized crime operations I've ever seen. Do you believe it's real? The technical evidence is compelling. The details about the network infrastructure, the financial records, the correlations with missing persons cases. This would be extremely difficult to fake. What happens now? I need to escalate this immediately to organized crime and specialized cyber units. We'll likely need to involve international agencies if this operation truly spans multiple countries. And what about me?" My profile was on their target list. Detective Rodriguez frowned. "That's my primary concern. If they're really targeting you, we need to get you into protection immediately." That afternoon, I was transferred to a safe house operated by the organized crime unit. It was a small apartment in a residential neighborhood with round-the-clock security and limited contact with the outside world. For the next 2 weeks, while authorities investigated the evidence I'd provided, I stayed in protective custody. It wasn't comfortable, but at least I felt relatively safe for the first time since discovering my profile on the network. But the official investigation didn't progress as I'd hoped. "It's complicated," Detective Rodriguez explained during one of his visits. "We've verified the sites exist, and our technical experts confirm the infrastructure is real. But accessing useful evidence legally is extremely difficult." "What do you mean?" "Most of the servers are in countries that don't cooperate with international legal requests. The ones in cooperative countries move constantly. By the time we process the legal paperwork to access a server, They've already moved to another jurisdiction. But you have all the evidence I gave you. Yes, and it's compelling. But to prosecute criminally, we need evidence obtained legally. What you collected might not be admissible in court. So they're going to get away with it? Detective Rodriguez sighed. We're working with international agencies to coordinate a broader operation. But these organizations have been operating for years because they're very good at avoiding legal detection. And the victims? What about the people being tortured right now? Elena, I understand your frustration, but we have to work within the legal system, even when that system has limitations. That conversation made me realize that the official authorities, no matter how well-intentioned, weren't going to act quickly enough to save the network's current victims. While in protective custody, I'd continued considering other options. One possibility was to make all the evidence I'd collected public, posting it on websites and social media to force international attention. But I also knew doing so could alert the network and cause them to move their operations, potentially making it harder for authorities to eventually shut them down. The decision was made for me 2.5 weeks after entering protective custody. Elena, I need to talk to you, Detective Rodriguez said when he arrived for one of his regular visits. His expression was more serious than usual. What happened? We've lost contact with one of our surveillance teams monitoring locations associated with the network. And this morning, we found evidence that your safe house may have been compromised. What kind of evidence? Surveillance equipment we definitely didn't install. Someone has been watching this location, and they likely know exactly where you are. My stomach sank. What do we do now? We move you to a new location immediately. But Elena, I also need to be honest with you. These people have resources and connections beyond what we anticipated. I'm not sure we can keep you safe indefinitely using conventional methods. What are you suggesting? That you consider unconventional options. I have contacts in organizations that operate outside official channels, but have more flexibility in dealing with these kinds of threats. What kind of organizations? Vigilante groups, ex-military, private security specialists, people who aren't constrained by legal protocols when it comes to protecting victims. It was an impossible decision. Trust official authorities who had proven incapable of protecting me adequately, or trust unofficial groups who might be effective but operated entirely outside the law. That night, as I considered my options in the new safe house, I received a message that changed everything. It didn't come through monitored official channels. It came through an encrypted email account I'd set up months earlier for work-related technical communication, an account only I knew about. Elena, the message read, we know exactly where you are. We know you've been working with the police. We know you have detailed evidence about our operations. We also know the authorities can't protect you effectively. And we know that eventually we will have access to you. But we're going to make you a one-time offer. Join us. Use your technical skills to improve our operations. And in return, not only will you live, but you'll be generously compensated for your expertise. Think of it as a career upgrade. Instead of working for a boring insurance company, you'd be working for the most sophisticated organization of its kind in the world. You have 48 hours to decide. If we don't receive a positive response by then, we'll proceed with alternative methods to secure your cooperation. And Elena, the alternative methods would be live streamed for our premium members. The message was signed simply, Management, the network. After reading the message 3 times, I called Detective Rodriguez immediately. I need those unofficial contacts, I told him without preamble. Now. 2 hours later, I met a man who identified himself only as Marcus. He was middle-aged, clearly ex-military, with the kind of calm presence that suggested extensive experience in dangerous situations. Detective Rodriguez briefed me on the situation, Marcus said, after we sat down in a random 24-hour cafe. My team specializes in cases where official authorities are limited in their response options. What kind of team? Ex-special forces, cybersecurity specialists, private investigators with international connections, people who've spent their careers dealing with exactly the kind of organizations threatening you. And what can you do that the police can't? Marcus smiled, but it wasn't a warm expression. Eleanor, the police have to operate within legal constraints. We don't. What does that mean specifically? It means we can access systems the police can't legally touch. We can operate in countries where the police have no jurisdiction, and we can use methods the police can't to neutralize threats. Are you talking about? We're talking about doing whatever's necessary to protect you and shut this operation down permanently. It was exactly the kind of conversation I'd never imagined having, but after weeks of feeling completely vulnerable despite official protective custody, the idea of people who could actually act aggressively against the network was tempting. What would you need from me? All the evidence you've collected, plus ongoing access to the network systems to monitor their communications and plans. And in return, we keep you alive, shut down the network permanently, and save any victims we can find before it's too late. How do I know I can trust you? Marcus pulled out a tablet and showed me a series of news articles. They were all about organized crime operations that had been mysteriously shut down in various countries over the past few years. Human trafficking rings, child exploitation networks, arms trafficking organizations. These were all our cases, he said. When official authorities can't act quickly or effectively enough, we do the work that needs to be done. And the people responsible? The people responsible are no longer capable of hurting anyone, Marcus replied calmly. I understood what he was implying, and part of me was disturbed by considering involvement with people who clearly operated outside the law. But another part of me thought of Andrea Sanchez, the teacher still being tortured live for a paying audience's entertainment, and all the other victims who could be saved if someone acted decisively. How long would you need? With your help to gain access, we could probably locate and infiltrate the main facilities within 2 weeks. Completing the operation might take another month. And what happens to me during that time? You would be with us, working directly on the operation. It's safer than any official safe house, and it lets you participate directly in shutting down the people who threatened you. That night, I couldn't sleep. The decision I had to make wasn't just about my own safety. It was about whether I was willing to work with people operating entirely outside the law to shut down an organization torturing and killing innocent people. By morning, I'd made my decision. I contacted Marcus and told him I was in. The next 3 months were the most intense and terrifying of my life. Marcus's team operated out of a series of safe houses and temporary command centers that changed every few days. The level of sophistication was comparable to what I'd seen in the network. Multiple layers of security, encrypted communications, technical equipment that probably cost more than my annual salary. The other team members identified themselves only by code names. Tech, a cybersecurity specialist who made my skills look amateur. Trace, an investigator who seemed capable of finding information on anyone in the world. Ghost, an ex-Special Forces operative responsible for the more direct aspects of our operations. My role was primarily technical analysis and system penetration. Using my knowledge of the network and its systems, I helped the team map the organization's full structure, identify key personnel, and locate physical facilities. What we discovered during this extended investigation was even more horrific than I'd initially imagined. The network wasn't an independent organization. It was part of an international conglomerate of criminal groups that had formed a cooperative partnership to share resources, victims, and expertise. The organizations I'd previously identified, the market, the laboratory, the arena, the academy, were all subsidiaries of a parent company operating under the name Prometheus Industries. Prometheus Industries had legitimate offices in multiple countries, operating as a consulting firm for security solutions and human resource management. But these front operations provided cover for the real business, the commercial exploitation of human beings for entertainment, experimentation, and other purposes I don't want to describe in detail. Prometheus Industries' clients included not only wealthy individuals with sadistic appetites, but also corporations wanting experimental data they couldn't obtain legally, and even government agencies outsourcing activities they couldn't conduct officially. During our 3 months of investigation, we identified over 400 active victims in facilities around the world. We also found records of over 2,000 people who had been processed by the organization in the past 5 years. Most of these people had died during the procedures they'd been subjected to. But we also found something unexpected. A few dozen people who had been held for extended periods but were still alive. These included Andrea Sanchez, the teacher from Cartagena I'd initially identified, and several others from missing persons cases I'd seen on the network. This discovery led to the final phase of our operation. Elena, Marcus told me during a briefing 3 months after I joined his team, we've located the network's main facility. It's a complex in a remote mountainous area about 200 kilometers from Bogota. How many victims? Our estimates suggest between 40 and 50 people currently held there, including several from the cases you originally identified. When do we move? Tonight. Tech has confirmed the security systems are vulnerable to infiltration, and Ghost has scouted the physical defenses. We have a window of about 4 hours before backup security arrives. The raid on the Prometheus Industries complex was something I'll never forget. We arrived at 2 in the morning, using specialized equipment to neutralize the security systems without triggering alarms. Ghost and 2 other operatives I'd never met before handled physical security, while Tech and I focused on accessing the computer systems to locate victims and gather evidence. What we found inside the complex was worse than anything I'd seen in the online videos. There were 3 levels of underground facilities, each designed for different types of procedures. The surface level looked like a legitimate medical facility, but the underground levels were something out of nightmares. Individual cells where people had been held for months or years. Surgical rooms where experimental procedures had been conducted without anesthesia. Broadcasting studios where live shows had been recorded for the network's paying audience. And in every one of these rooms, evidence of systematic torture that had been commercially exploited. We found 47 survivors in total. Most were in conditions requiring extensive medical and psychological treatment to recover. Some had been so damaged by their experiences that it wasn't clear if they'd ever be able to resume normal lives, but they were alive. Andrea Sanchez was among the survivors. When we found her, she'd been held for nearly 4 months. She was barely recognizable compared to the photos I'd seen of her when she first disappeared, but she was conscious and able to communicate. "Who are you?" she asked when Ghost broke down her cell door. "We're here to take you home," he replied. Over the next 4 hours, we evacuated all the survivors and transported them to medical facilities where they could receive proper treatment. We also collected terabytes of evidence about Prometheus Industries' operations, including full financial records, client lists, and documented procedures. The evidence showed that the network's operations generated about $50 million annually, with profits distributed among hundreds of individuals worldwide who provided funding, expertise, or protection for the organization. It also showed that government officials in multiple countries had either been clients of the organization or had been paid to provide protection from legal interference. This corruption extended to law enforcement agencies, judicial systems, and even some humanitarian organizations that should have been investigating these crimes. After evacuating all the survivors and collecting all available evidence, Ghost and his team implemented the final phase of our operation, ensuring Prometheus Industries could never resume operations. I won't describe exactly what this entailed, but I can say the complex and all associated facilities were permanently disabled. Also, that several key members of Prometheus Industries staff were identified and located during subsequent operations. Those individuals are no longer capable of harming anyone. It's been 6 months since the raid on the Prometheus Industries complex. The 47 survivors we rescued are all receiving medical and psychological treatment. Most are making progress toward recovery, though several will require ongoing support for the rest of their lives due to the trauma they experienced. Andrea Sanchez was among those who made a substantial recovery. Last month, she testified in closed hearings about her experience, providing evidence used to prosecute several individuals associated with the organization. The evidence we collected during our investigation has been shared with law enforcement agencies worldwide. This has resulted in arrests and prosecutions in over 20 countries, though many of the most powerful individuals involved have evaded criminal charges through political connections and legal technicalities. Marcus and his team continued operating, focusing on other criminal organizations that official authorities can't address effectively. I chose not to continue working with them after the Prometheus Industries operation, but maintain contact and occasionally provide technical consultation for their investigations. As for me, I officially returned to my job at the insurance company, though obviously I no longer work in quite the same capacity. My experiences have left me with certain limitations in terms of what kinds of technical work I can comfortably perform. I've also been working with several organizations dedicated to supporting survivors of human trafficking and organized exploitation. My technical skills have been useful in developing better systems for identifying and locating victims of these crimes. But the most important outcome of everything that happened is that people now know organizations like Prometheus Industries exist. The evidence we documented during our investigation has been partially released through carefully coordinated leaks to news organizations and human rights groups. While much of the specific information remains classified to protect survivors and ongoing investigations, enough has been revealed to confirm that the commercial exploitation of human beings for entertainment purposes is a real and growing industry. This awareness has led to increased funding for law enforcement units dedicated to investigating these crimes, better cooperation between international agencies, and new legal frameworks designed to prosecute individuals involved in cross-border exploitation operations. Not everyone associated with Prometheus Industries has been prosecuted. In fact, many of the most powerful individuals involved have never been publicly identified, let alone arrested, but their main operations have been permanently disrupted. The network no longer exists. The market, the laboratory, the arena, and the academy have been forced to cease operations or move underground in ways that significantly reduce their effectiveness. And most importantly, hundreds of people who would have been victims of these organizations are safe. This morning, I received an email from Andrea Sanchez. She's returned to work as a teacher and is engaged to her boyfriend, who supported her through her recovery process. Elena, she wrote, I wanted you to know that I start every day grateful that someone was brave enough to find us. Whatever happened during those months, I knew someone in the world cared enough to look for people like us. Thank you for caring. Thank you for not giving up. Thank you for being willing to risk everything to save people you'd never met. The world needs more people like you. Reading her message reminded me why I decided to investigate the network in the first place, and why I chose to work with Marcus's team despite the moral ambiguities involved. Sometimes, official systems of justice and protection are inadequate to address the worst crimes humans commit against each other. Sometimes, people who care have to choose to act outside official channels when those channels fail to protect innocent victims. And sometimes, the only way to stop true evil is to be willing to confront it directly, no matter the personal costs involved. My curiosity about the deep web led me to discover something horrific happening in the world. But that same curiosity, combined with a refusal to ignore what I'd found, eventually led to the shutdown of operations that had tortured and killed thousands of people. Not everyone who explores the darker corners of the internet will find something as terrible as what I found. But if you do find evidence of real crimes against real people, remember that ignoring what you've seen makes you complicit in allowing it to continue. And remember that sometimes when official systems fail, individuals must choose to act to protect each other. The deep web contains both knowledge and horror. What you do with what you find there defines who you really are. My name is Elena Vasquez, and this is what I found in the depths of the internet, and this is what I chose to do about it.